The Blackhawks appeared at precisely 10:47 a.m. Three dark silhouettes against the crisp October sky, mechanical predators descending upon the peaceful campus of Eagle Ridge University. Their rotors cut through the Montana air with military precision, the sound echoing between century-old brick buildings where students had been peacefully attending Thursday morning classes just moments before. From her third-floor window in Maple Hall, Emma Hayes watched them approach. Her textbook, American Military History Gulf War to Present, slipped from her fingers and hit the dormitory floor with a dull thud. Unlike her classmates, who rushed to windows with phones raised in excitement, Emma stood absolutely still, her body instinctively positioned behind the window frame, maintaining cover while preserving line of sight. 3 military helicopters, Delta Force configuration, full tactical team. They had found her. 2 hours earlier, Emma had been just another freshman art major struggling through Professor Diana Miller's 8 a.m. military history class. The lecture hall had been half empty, filled with sleepy students and genuine history enthusiasts. Professor Miller, with steel-gray hair and commanding presence, had been discussing Operation Desert Storm. The 1991 ground campaign lasted just 100 hours, Miller explained, but the psychological impact on American military doctrine would reshape warfare for decades to come. Emma sat in the back row, her notebook open, but mostly empty. Her hand rose reluctantly when Miller asked about coalition air superiority. "Ms. Hayes, your thoughts?" "I think they bombed too much," Emma answered, her voice calibrated to sound uncertain. "Wasn't there like controversy about civilian casualties? The intentional vagueness, the Valley Girl inflection, the feigned ignorance, all calculated." Professor Miller's disappointment was palpable. "That's a rather simplistic take. Anyone else?" What Emma wanted to say, what she knew firsthand from her mother's accounts and classified briefings, was that the air campaign had been revolutionary in its precision, but still resulted in tragic civilian casualties at Al Amiria shelter. She could have detailed the exact ordnance used, the F-117 Nighthawk's capabilities, the battle damage assessment protocols that failed. She could have explained how those lessons informed current ROE protocols she herself had followed in Syria. But Emma Hayes' freshman art student wouldn't know these things. The dormitory room Emma shared with Rachel Wilson told the story of 2 entirely different people. Rachel's side exploded with color and chaos. Posters of Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Guns N' Roses, her vintage phase clothes draped over every surface, textbooks stacked haphazardly beside empty Red Bull cans. Photos covered her wall, Rachel with friends at football games, family vacations, graduation. Emma's side existed in stark contrast. Bed made with military corners tight enough to bounce a quarter. Desk meticulously organized pens arranged by color notebooks stacked by subject laptop precisely centered. No photos adorned her walls, no mementos, nothing personal except a small collection of art supplies and textbooks arranged by height. In 3 months at Eagle Ridge, Emma had carefully constructed the identity of an unremarkable freshman. She attended parties but never drank too much. She participated in class discussions without standing out. She made acquaintances but kept everyone, even Rachel, at a calculated distance. Now, with helicopters landing on the central quad that cover was disintegrating by the second, Emma moved to her desk and opened her psychology textbook, not to study but to retrieve what was hidden inside. Between pages discussing post-traumatic stress, she kept the single photograph she'd allowed herself to bring from her previous life. The picture showed a much younger Emma, perhaps 12, standing proudly beside a woman in Desert Marine Corps fatigues. Both were smiling against the backdrop of Camp Pendleton. Both had the same determined green eyes, the same set to their jaw. On the back, in careful handwriting, "My daughter, the true warrior. Your courage will light the way home. Captain Catherine Hayes had died during Emma's second year of high school, not in combat, but from cancer that had spread before anyone noticed. Before she passed, she'd made Emma promise to follow her own path, not just follow in her mother's military footsteps. A promise Emma had broken by enlisting at 17 with her father's reluctant blessing. A promise she'd tried to reclaim by disappearing from a military hospital in Germany 3 months ago, leaving behind a decorated service record and unanswered questions. The campus-wide public address system crackled to life. Attention Eagle Ridge University. This is a security announcement. We are looking for freshman student Emma Hayes. This is not a drill. Emma Hayes, please report to the main quadrangle immediately. Emma carefully returned the photograph to its hiding place. She took a deep breath, centering herself the way she'd been trained. 3 slow counts in. Hold. 5 counts out. The girl who had spent months perfecting the art of being overlooked was about to become the center of attention in the most dramatic way possible. Her only question was, who would she be when she walked out that door? The frightened art student she'd been pretending to be, or the soldier she'd been trying to escape? The sound of military boots in the hallway made the decision for her. Emma moved to the window, positioning herself to observe the tactical situation developing below. Her assessment was automatic, reflexive, the product of thousands of hours of training and combat experience. 3 Black Hawks, 2 securing the perimeter, main force from the center aircraft, 12 operators in full tactical gear, M4A1 carbines with ACOG sights. Standard Delta configuration. Perimeter established with overlapping fields of fire. Campus security outmatched, keeping their distance. Students held back approximately 50 yards from the landing zone. Command element emerging from lead helicopter. Emma's breath caught when she saw him. Colonel James Marshall, 58 years old according to his file, but looking every bit as imposing as when he'd recruited her 4 years ago. Distinguished service in Desert Storm, Afghanistan, and classified operations across 3 continents. The silver in his close-cropped hair had increased new lines etched around his eyes, but his posture remained ramrod straight, the bearing of a man accustomed to command. Marshall surveyed the scene with practiced efficiency, immediately identifying security weaknesses, establishing communication with campus authorities, and directing his team with minimal hand signals. To untrained eyes, he might appear calm and methodical. Emma saw the tension in his shoulders, the tactical alertness in his constantly scanning gaze. He wasn't just here to find her. He was here expecting trouble. From the dorm's entrance below, Emma could hear excited voices as students poured out, phones raised to capture the military spectacle unfolding on their previously peaceful campus. A sharp knock on her door. 3 rapid strikes, a pause, then 2 more. Military pattern, not a curious student. "Miss Hayes," came a female voice. "Sergeant Cooper, United States Army. We need you to come with us." Emma remained silent, evaluating options that had already dwindled to almost nothing. The window offered a 3-story drop onto concrete. The hallway would be controlled. There was nowhere to run that they hadn't already anticipated. "One moment," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. When she opened the door, Emma found herself face to face with 2 soldiers in combat utilities. Sergeant Cooper was a woman in her 30s, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen multiple deployments. Behind her stood a male lieutenant, whose nameplate read Davis, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. "Miss Hayes," Cooper said, her tone professional but not unfriendly. "Colonel Marshall has requested your presence on the quad." As they moved toward the elevator, doors opened behind them. Fellow students peered out, phones raised, whispering among themselves. By tonight, footage of Emma being escorted by military personnel would be circulating on every social media platform. The elevator ride was silent. Emma could feel both soldiers studying her, likely wondering how this unassuming college freshman had warranted such an extraordinary retrieval operation. As they emerged into the lobby, Emma saw that the entire first floor was buzzing with activity. Students clustered around windows, trying to get a better view of the military presence outside. Professor Miller was among them, her face pale with concern, as she spoke rapidly into her cell phone. Emma. The voice belonged to Josh Brennan, a fellow freshman from her art theory class. He was staring at her with complete bewilderment. "What's going on? Are you in trouble?" "I don't know," Emma said quietly, the lie coming easily after months of practice. "There must be some mistake." But as they pushed through the crowd and emerged into the bright October sunlight, Emma knew there was no mistake at all. The central quad of Eagle Ridge University had been transformed into a military staging area. Students and faculty lined the perimeter, held back by a security cordon. Campus security officers stood alongside military personnel, their faces showing a mixture of confusion and concern. Colonel Marshall stood in the center of it all, his presence commanding the space. When he saw her approaching, his expression shifted from professional focus to something more complex, relief perhaps, mixed with disappointment. Among the campus security team, one figure stood apart from the others. Victor Thompson, age 67, according to the university badge visible on his chest. Unlike his younger colleagues, Thompson wasn't gawking at the military hardware or expressing confusion. His weathered face, lined by age and experience, showed recognition. His stance, the way his eyes constantly scanned the perimeter, the slight favoring of his left leg, all marked him as military. Vietnam era, most likely. The way he watched Emma, specifically with knowing eyes rather than confusion, suggested he recognized something in her that others missed. "Emma," Colonel Marshall said, as she was brought before him, his voice carrying easily across the quad. "Colonel," she replied, feeling hundreds of eyes on her. "You've been difficult to find," Marshall continued, his gaze taking in her civilian clothes, her university ID badge, the carefully crafted appearance of innocence. "Though I have to admit, hiding in plain sight as a college freshman showed more creativity than I expected. Not many people would think to look for Sergeant Emma Hayes in an introduction to art history class." The murmur that went through the crowd was audible. Sergeant. The title hung in the air like a challenge to everything these people thought they knew about the quiet girl from Maple Hall. "I'm not Sergeant Hayes anymore," Emma said quietly. "I'm just a student here." "Are you?" Marshall's tone carried a hint of skepticism. "Because the Sergeant Hayes I know wouldn't have allowed these students to cluster so close to military aircraft without establishing proper safety protocols. She wouldn't have ignored the tactical disadvantage of being surrounded by potential civilian casualties, and she certainly wouldn't have waited for an escort when she heard helicopters landing." The accuracy of his observations made Emma's stomach clench. Even while trying to maintain her civilian cover, her training had been constantly analyzing threats, calculating risks, maintaining situational awareness. "Why are you here?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "You know why," Marshall replied, his voice carrying the weight of shared history. 3 months ago, you disappeared from a military hospital in Germany. No discharge papers, no forwarding address, no communication with your unit. People have been looking for you." "I needed time," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the quad, where hundreds of people were straining to hear every word, her response carried clearly. "Time for what?" To pretend the last 3 years of your life didn't happen? To act like you're just another teenager worried about midterms and weekend parties? Marshall's frustration was evident, though he kept his voice controlled. Time to figure out who I am without the military defining me, Emma replied, feeling a strange relief at finally speaking a truth after months of careful lies. Time to see if I could be a normal person, living a normal life. From his position at the security line, Victor Thompson watched the exchange with the recognition of someone who understood exactly what was happening. His eyes narrowed slightly at Emma's words, a flicker of empathy crossing his weathered features. Marshall studied Emma for a long moment. Around them, the crowd of students and faculty waited in suspended silence, witnessing a conversation that was clearly about much more than they could understand. The situation has deteriorated, he finally said. The mission you were extracted from is being reactivated. We need our best intelligence operative back in the field. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. The mission that had nearly killed her. The operation that had left her with scars, both visible and invisible, that had driven her to flee from everything she had ever known in search of something resembling peace. I'm not that person anymore, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she could feel her carefully constructed civilian identity beginning to crack. We'll see about that, Marshall replied, his tone suggesting that this conversation was far from over. The tension in the quad was broken by the sharp crack of breaking glass. A second-floor window in Wilson Hall had shattered, sending shards cascading onto the pathway below. Students screamed and scattered, their orderly perimeter dissolving into chaos as people pushed and shoved to escape the falling debris. But Emma didn't run. While everyone else's attention was focused upward on the broken window, she had already identified the real threat. The sound hadn't come from an accident or structural failure. Her trained ear had caught the distinctive whistle that preceded the glass, breaking something small and fast-moving, had been thrown with considerable force and accuracy. "Sniper," she said quietly, the word carrying clearly in the sudden silence that followed the initial panic. Her voice was calm, professional, completely different from the uncertain freshman tone she had been using moments before. Second floor east corner of Wilson Hall. Trajectory suggests the projectile came from approximately 32 degrees elevation, which puts the source at... She paused, her eyes scanning the surrounding buildings with mechanical precision, calculating angles and sightlines with the kind of speed that only came from extensive training and real-world experience. The clock tower, she finished, pointing to the campus's most distinctive landmark. Third-level north-facing window. Remington 700, or equivalent, judging by the sound signature. 400 to 500 meters. Colonel Marshall's head snapped toward her, his expression shifting from surprise to something approaching respect. How can you be certain? Because that's where I would position myself if I wanted overwatch of this quad while maintaining multiple escape routes, Emma replied, her mind automatically running through tactical considerations she had spent months trying to suppress. The clock tower offers 300 visibility access to the maintenance stairwell and direct connection to the underground utility tunnels that lead to the parking structure on East Campus. Lieutenant Davis was already speaking rapidly into his radio, coordinating with his team to secure the area Emma had identified. Sergeant Cooper had her weapon at low ready, prepared for immediate use if the situation escalated. "Students," Marshall called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in crisis situations, "move away from the buildings. Form up in the center of the quad, where we have clear sight lines in all directions." But the students weren't moving fast enough for Emma's comfort. Their panic was understandable, but tactically dangerous. A crowd of confused civilians created countless opportunities for additional threats to emerge, and their random movement patterns made it nearly impossible to maintain effective security. "No," Emma said sharply, stepping forward before she could stop herself. "Not the center. That makes them a clustered target. Spread them along the south perimeter backs to the administration building facing inward. Create multiple smaller groups rather than one large mass. And get someone to the emergency broadcast system. If this is a diversion, we need to account for all students and faculty across campus." The words came out with the crisp efficiency of someone who had managed similar situations before, someone who understood the difference between crowd control and tactical positioning. Every person watching could hear the authority in her voice, the kind of confidence that only came from experience in genuinely dangerous situations. Colonel Marshall studied her for a long moment, then nodded to his team, who began implementing her suggestions with immediate efficiency. From his position near the security line, Victor Thompson watched with dawning recognition. His eyes never left Emma as she transitioned from frightened student to tactical commander in the span of seconds. "Impressive," Colonel Marshall said quietly, stepping closer to Emma so that their conversation wouldn't carry to the surrounding crowd. 3 months of playing college student, and your tactical instincts are still sharper than most of my active personnel." "It was just common sense," Emma replied, but even she could hear how weak the deflection sounded. Common sense didn't include knowledge of university tunnel systems or the ability to calculate sniper angles in seconds. "Was it?" Marshall asked. "Because I'm watching a 19-year-old art major demonstrate tactical awareness that most of my lieutenants couldn't match. I'm seeing someone who automatically assessed multiple threat vectors, calculated optimal positioning for civilian protection, and identified the most likely source of hostile fire in under 30 seconds. Professor Miller approached them cautiously, her academic credentials clearly making her uncomfortable with the military terminology being thrown around. "Colonel, I don't understand what's happening here. Emma is one of my students. She's never shown any indication of military background or tactical training. She struggles with basic military history concepts in my class." "Does she?" Marshall asked, his gaze never leaving Emma's face. "Or does she pretend to struggle because demonstrating her real knowledge would raise questions she didn't want to answer?" The observation hit closer to home than Emma was comfortable with. She had indeed been careful to perform at average levels in all her classes, particularly Professor Miller's military studies course. Lieutenant Davis's voice crackled through Marshall's radio. "Tower secured, sir. No hostile presence found, but there's evidence someone was here recently. Cigarette butts, food wrappers, and what looks like a makeshift observation post." "Decoy," Emma said immediately. "Classic misdirection. The real threat isn't in the tower. It never was." The broken window was designed to draw attention and resources away from the actual objective, which is what? Marshall asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Emma looked around the quad, noting the positions of the military personnel, the location of the helicopters, the dispersed students and faculty. Her mind automatically began calculating what a hostile force would want to achieve in this situation. "Me," she said quietly. "This whole thing is about separating me from potential protection, isolating me in an open space where I can be easily observed and assessed. Someone wanted to see how I would react under pressure, whether my training would override my civilian cover." As if summoned by her words, Rachel appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face pale with confusion and growing realization. She was staring at Emma with the expression of someone trying to reconcile what they were seeing with everything they thought they knew. "Emma!" Rachel called out, her voice carrying across the quad. "What's going on? Who are you, really?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, hundreds of students and faculty members waited for an answer that would either confirm or shatter everything they believed about the quiet freshman from Maple Hall. Emma looked at her roommate, seeing the hurt and confusion in her eyes. For 3 months, they had shared a living space, studied together, complained about cafeteria food, and built what Emma had thought was a genuine friendship. Now she realized that Rachel had been living with a stranger, someone who had been lying about every fundamental aspect of her identity. "I'm someone who used to be very good at things I'm trying to forget," Emma said loud enough for Rachel to hear. "I'm someone who came here hoping to learn how to be normal, how to be the kind of person who worries about midterms instead of mission parameters." She paused, looking around at the faces surrounding her students who had accepted her as one of their own professors, who had seen her as just another young person figuring out her path, friends who had trusted her with their own stories while she had kept her truth locked away. "I'm someone who thought she could leave her past behind." Emma finished meeting Rachel's hurt gaze directly. But, apparently, the past has other plans. The conference room in the administration building had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. University President Richard Westfield sat at the head of the polished oak table, his usual composure strained as he tried to process the unprecedented situation unfolding on his campus. At 60 years old, with silver hair and the ramrod-straight posture that spoke of his own military background, 20 years in the Army before entering academia, Westfield was not a man easily rattled. Today, however, the crease between his eyebrows had deepened to a furrow as he studied the young woman seated across from him. To his right sat Colonel Marshall, his presence commanding even in this academic setting. Victor Thompson, still in his campus security uniform, had been invited to join them, a courtesy to his Vietnam-era service record and his obvious understanding of the situation's military dimensions. Emma occupied the chair directly across from Westfield, still wearing her university sweatshirt, but somehow looking entirely different than she had that morning. The transformation wasn't physical. She was the same 19-year-old who had been studying for her midterms just hours earlier. But something fundamental had shifted in her posture, her alertness, the way she held herself. "Miss Hayes," Westfield began consulting a folder that had appeared with suspicious speed. "I'm looking at your admission file, and I have to say it raises more questions than it answers." Emma remained silent, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had expected this moment since the helicopters had landed. Academic institutions, despite their liberal ideals, were bureaucratic organizations that required documentation, verification, and paper trails. Her enrollment at Eagle Ridge had been carefully orchestrated, but under serious scrutiny, the facade would crumble. "Your high school transcripts are from Riverside Academy in Portland," Westfield continued. "But when my staff called their registrar 20 minutes ago, they had no record of a student named Emma Hayes graduating in their class of 2022. Colonel Marshall leaned forward slightly. "That's because she didn't graduate from high school in the traditional sense. She earned her GED while serving overseas." "Serving overseas?" Westfield's voice rose with incredulity. "She's 19 years old. When exactly was she serving overseas?" "That information is classified," Marshall replied curtly. "What I can tell you is that Emma Hayes enlisted in the United States Army at 17 with parental consent. She completed basic training, advanced individual training, and specialized intelligence schooling before being deployed to active combat zones." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. President Westfield's face had gone pale. Victor Thompson was studying Emma with new interest, as if seeing her for the first time since entering the room. "Combat zones," Westfield repeated weakly. "What kind of combat zones?" The kind that requires security clearances I'm not authorized to discuss in this setting, Marshall said. What I will tell you is that Sergeant Hayes served with distinction in multiple theaters of operation. She received commendations for valor, intelligence gathering, and tactical innovation. She saved American lives on more than one occasion. Emma felt the familiar knot in her stomach that came with hearing her military accomplishments recited like a resume. Those commendations represented some of the worst moments of her life operations, where success had been measured in casualties prevented rather than objectives achieved. Victor Thompson cleared his throat, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes. If she's such an accomplished soldier, why is she hiding out in a college dormitory? Why not return to active duty? The question struck at the heart of everything Emma had been running from. She looked up from her hands, meeting Thompson's gaze directly for the first time since entering the room. Because sometimes being good at something doesn't mean you want to keep doing it, she said quietly. Because there's a difference between being capable of violence and wanting to build a life around it. Thompson held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slightly, the recognition of one combat veteran to another across the generations. Sergeant Hayes was extracted from her last mission under difficult circumstances. Marshall explained, his tone carrying a note of something that might have been sympathy. She spent several weeks in a military medical facility in Germany recovering from both physical and psychological trauma. When she was cleared for discharge processing, she disappeared. "You mean she went AWOL?" Westfield said, his administrative mind automatically translating military euphemisms to more straightforward terms. Technically, she was between assignments and had accrued leave time, Marshall replied carefully. But yes, she left without authorization and without maintaining contact with her chain of command. Emma could feel their eyes on her, waiting for an explanation that she wasn't sure she could provide. How do you explain to civilians that you can't sleep without dreaming about the faces of people you've killed? How do you describe the feeling of being 19 years old and having more blood on your hands than most soldiers accumulate in entire careers? I needed to find out if I could be someone else, she said finally. I wanted to see if I could live a normal life, make normal friends, worry about normal problems. I wanted to know if there was more to me than just being a weapon. The honesty in her voice seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including herself. For 3 months, she had been so focused on maintaining her cover that she had almost forgotten the genuine desperation that had driven her to create it in the first place. "And have you," Thompson asked gently, "found out if you can be someone else?" Emma thought about the morning she had spent studying for her history exam, the conversations with Rachel about classes and weekend plans, the simple pleasure of sitting in Professor Miller's lectures without calculating threat assessments or exit strategies. "I thought so," she admitted. "For a while I really thought I could just be a student, just be Emma, the art major who struggles with philosophy and makes terrible coffee in the dorm kitchen." "But," Marshall prompted, leaning forward slightly. "But when those helicopters landed, when I heard the glass break, when I saw students in potential danger, I couldn't turn it off. The training, the awareness, the need to assess and respond to threats, it's not something I do. It's something I am." Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying her with new respect. "That's why you knew about the maintenance tunnels. Why you could identify sniper positions and calculate tactical angles. It wasn't luck or common sense." "No," Emma confirmed. "It was 3 years of training and 18 months of active deployment in some of the most dangerous places on Earth." The room fell silent as the implications of her admission sank in. This wasn't just a case of a student with a mysterious background. This was a highly trained intelligence operative who had been living undetected in their community for months. "You're wondering if I'm dangerous," Emma said into the silence, addressing the unspoken concern hanging in the air. "The answer is yes, but not to anyone here." Before anyone could respond, Marshall's phone buzzed with an urgent message. His expression darkened as he read it, and when he looked up, his focus had shifted entirely to operational priorities. "President Westfield, I'm afraid this discussion will have to continue later. We've just received intelligence that changes everything." He turned to Emma, and she could see the weight of command decisions in his eyes. "Sergeant Hayes, I'm officially reactivating your security clearance. We have a developing crisis that requires your specific expertise." "What kind of crisis?" Emma asked, though she was already dreading the answer. "The kind that could get a lot of people killed if we don't have our best people working to prevent it," Marshall replied grimly. "The kind that doesn't care if you want to be a normal college student." President Westfield raised a hand. "Now wait just a minute, Colonel. Ms. Hayes is enrolled at this university. You can't just—" "Actually, he can," Emma interrupted, her voice resigned. "My inactive reserve status means I can be recalled to active duty at any time." She turned to Marshall, her expression hardening into the professional mask she had worn for 3 years before coming to Eagle Ridge. "Brief me." Marshall nodded to Thompson and Westfield. "What follows is classified. I'll need the room." As the university officials reluctantly left, Emma felt the last pieces of her civilian identity slipping away. The illusion of normalcy she had so carefully constructed was crumbling around her, replaced by the cold reality of what she had been running from and what she might have to become again. Marshall waited until the door closed behind them, then activated a small device on the table that emitted a low hum, a counter-surveillance measure to prevent electronic eavesdropping. "3 months ago, you were part of Operation Sandstorm," he began without preamble. "Your mission was to infiltrate a terrorist cell in northern Syria led by former Iraqi military intelligence officer Mustafa al-Farid." Emma nodded, the memories flooding back with painful clarity. "I was embedded for 14 weeks. Gathered intelligence on their network supply chain's potential targets. The extraction went sideways when al-Farid's security chief became suspicious." "What you don't know is what happened after your extraction," Marshall continued. "The intelligence you gathered led to a joint special operations strike on al-Farid's compound. We thought he was killed in the attack." "He wasn't," Emma concluded, reading between the lines. "No, he survived and has spent the last 3 months rebuilding his network. More concerning, he's acquired chemical weapons, specifically VX nerve agent, from old Iraqi stockpiles that were never declared after the First Gulf War." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. VX was among the deadliest chemical weapons ever created, a colorless, odorless liquid that could kill through skin contact alone. A single drop could be fatal. "Target?" she asked automatically, shifting to the clipped, efficient language of mission briefings. "We believe he's planning coordinated attacks in major European cities, Paris, Berlin, London, targeting transportation hubs during peak hours for maximum casualties." "Casualty estimate," Marshall's expression was grim. "Conservative projections put it at 50,000. Could be significantly higher if they hit all targets simultaneously." 50,000 people. The number was abstract, impossible to truly comprehend. But Emma had seen enough death to understand what it represented. Families destroyed, communities shattered, a level of suffering that would ripple across generations. "Why me?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because you know his organization from the inside. You've seen how they operate, how they move people and materials, how they communicate. And more importantly, al-Farid doesn't know you survived the extraction. He believes the American agent who infiltrated his group died during the raid." Emma was about to respond when a deafening crash shook the building. Not the subtle breaking of glass this time, but the unmistakable sound of an explosion, small but powerful, precisely placed. The conference room door burst open as Thompson rushed back in. East wing of Wilson Hall just had some kind of blast. No casualties reported yet, but he never finished the sentence. A second explosion closer this time rattled the windows of the administration building itself. Then a third from the direction of the quad where Marshall's team had been securing the helicopters. Emma was already moving her body, responding before her conscious mind had fully processed the threat. She grabbed Marshall's sidearm from his holster, a practiced move he didn't attempt to prevent, and was heading for the door before either man could react. "Hayes, wait," Marshall called after her. "We need a coordinated—" But Emma was already gone, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone whose survival had depended on speed and decisiveness in combat zones around the world. The peaceful university campus had just become another battlefield, and despite everything she had tried to leave behind, she was once again running toward danger instead of away from it. As she sprinted across the administrative building's marble floor, she caught her reflection in a glass display case, no longer the carefully crafted image of an ordinary student, but the hard-eyed focus of Sergeant Emma Hayes, Delta Force operator. The very person she had come to Eagle Ridge to escape had returned in the space of a heartbeat. Emma burst through the front doors in time to see chaos unfolding across the campus. Small fires burned in 3 locations, precision strikes designed not for maximum casualties, but for maximum disruption. The quad where students had gathered to watch the military presence was now a scene of panicked evacuation. From her elevated position on the administration building's steps, Emma scanned the scene with practiced efficiency. The explosions were diversionary small charges placed to create panic without structural damage. The real threat would be movement on the roof of the science building caught her eye. A figure in dark clothing, partially obscured by the building's HVAC equipment, setting up what appeared to be a rifle on a bipod. Without hesitation, Emma raised Marshall's sidearm, a standard-issue Sig Sauer P320, and took aim. The distance was approximately 175 meters, well beyond the effective range of a handgun for most shooters. But Emma wasn't most shooters. She exhaled slowly, her finger taking up the slack in the trigger, compensating for distance, and the slight crosswind leading the target fractionally. The shot cracked across the campus, followed almost immediately by the sound of the figure on the rooftop collapsing behind their weapon. By now, Marshall's team was responding to the attack, moving with the coordinated precision of elite operators. Students were being evacuated to secure locations, and campus security was establishing a perimeter under Thompson's direction. Emma was already moving again, heading toward the science building. Whoever had placed those charges and positioned that shooter knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't a random attack. It was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to test defenses and gather intelligence. As she rounded the corner of the humanities building, Emma came face to face with Rachel, who had apparently been running toward the administration building, perhaps looking for her. The shock on Rachel's face at seeing her roommate holding a military-grade weapon with the practiced ease of a professional was quickly replaced by fear and confusion. "Emma, what the hell is going on? There are explosions, and—" Rachel's eyes widened as she took in the blood spatter on Emma's sweatshirt, blowback from the precision shot she'd just made. "Oh my God, are you hurt?" "Not my blood," Emma replied tersely. "Rachel, you need to get to the athletic center. That's where they're taking students. It's the most secure building on campus." "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's happening," Rachel insisted, the stubborn determination that Emma had come to respect over their months as roommates now directed squarely at her. "Who are you, really?" Before Emma could answer, the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle split the air, and chunks of brick exploded from the wall inches from where they stood. Emma reacted instantly, tackling Rachel to the ground and covering her with her own body, as more shots followed methodically, walking a line toward their position. Remington, 700, 308 Winchester, suppressed, but not subsonic. Emma analyzed automatically, her mind cataloging the sound signature even as she pulled Rachel behind the concrete base of a campus statue for better cover. Shooter is approximately 400 meters elevated position clock tower again. How do you know that? Rachel gasped, her voice tight with fear. Because I've been shot at more times than I can count, Emma replied grimly, checking the SIG's magazine. 5 rounds remaining. Not enough for suppressive fire, but enough if she could get a clean shot. A shadow fell across them, and Emma whirled weapon up and ready, only to find herself aiming at Victor Thompson. The old security guard had somehow made his way to their position without exposing himself to the sniper's line of fire, a skill that spoke of experience far beyond campus security work. "Thought you might need this," he said calmly, offering her a campus security radio. "Marshall's team is moving on the tower, but they could use some intel on the shooter's position." Emma took the radio with a nod of thanks. "Vietnam?" she asked, recognizing the tactical awareness in the older man's movements. "2 tours with the 101st Airborne," Thompson confirmed with a grim smile. 1969 to 71. Been a while, but some things you don't forget. "Cover her," Emma instructed, indicating Rachel. "Get her to the athletic center when it's clear." Thompson nodded, taking up position beside Rachel with a practiced eye for lines of sight and potential threats. Emma switched on the radio, quickly locating the frequency Marshall's team was using. "Marshall, this is Hayes. Shooter is on the 3rd level of the clock tower north-facing window. Single operator with a bolt-action rifle. Not a professional. Positioning and timing suggest limited training." Marshall's voice came back immediately. "Copy that, Hayes. Team is approaching from the east stairwell. Where are you?" "Providing distraction," Emma replied, already moving before he could order her to stand down. She sprinted from cover to cover, using buildings and landscaping features to shield her movement from the tower. The sniper fired twice more, both shots missing, as Emma's erratic movement pattern made her a difficult target. She reached the base of the Humanities building, which offered a clear line of sight to the clock tower's northern face. From this angle, she could see the barrel of the rifle protruding slightly from the window. Another amateur mistake that a trained sniper would never make. Emma took a deep breath, raised the SIG, and fired 3 rapid shots. Not at the sniper, who was protected by the tower's stone walls, but at the ancient wooden frame of the window itself. The old wood splintered under the impact, sending shards flying into the room beyond. The distraction worked. The sniper pulled back momentarily, just enough for Marshall's team to breach the room from behind. Through the radio, Emma heard the brief scuffle followed by Marshall's terse report, "Target secured." Emma lowered the weapon, feeling the familiar post-combat crash as adrenaline began to ebb. Her hands were steady. They always were during operations, but she could feel the tremor waiting just beneath the surface, the delayed reaction that would come later when the danger had passed. She made her way back to where Thompson was still guarding Rachel, who looked pale but composed. The older man gave Emma an approving nod as she approached. "Not bad for a kid," he said with the gruff respect of one combat veteran to another. "You've got good instincts." "Thanks," Emma replied, then turned to Rachel, whose expression had transformed from fear to something more complex, a mixture of awe, confusion, and hurt. "Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay," Rachel said, her voice shaking slightly. "My roommate just turned into Rambo. There are soldiers all over campus, and someone was shooting at us. So no Emma or whoever you really are, I'm pretty far from okay. Emma holstered the cig in her waistband at the small of her back, a habitual position that concealed the weapon while keeping it accessible. The gesture, so automatic and professional, seemed to underscore Rachel's point about her transformed identity. "I'm sorry," Emma said the words, feeling woefully inadequate. "I never wanted any of this to touch you or anyone else here." "But it did," Rachel replied, "and I think you owe me an explanation. A real one this time." Before Emma could respond, Marshall approached with two of his operators, his expression grim. "We need to talk," he said to Emma, then glanced at Rachel and Thompson. "Privately." Emma nodded, knowing that whatever came next would shatter the last remaining pieces of the life she had tried to build at Eagle Ridge. The peaceful existence of Emma Hayes, freshman art student, had ended the moment those helicopters appeared in the Montana sky. She turned to Rachel, seeing the questions and hurt in her roommate's eyes. "I have to go," she said simply, "but I promise when this is over, if I can, I'll tell you everything." "You won't be coming back, will you?" Rachel asked, a surprising perceptiveness in her question. Emma looked at the campus around them, the place that for 3 brief months had offered her a glimpse of a different life, a chance at normalcy that now seemed like a distant dream. "I don't know," she admitted honestly, "but I hope so." The secure communication center that had been hastily established in the university's library basement bore no resemblance to the quiet study space it had been that morning. Banks of military-grade equipment hummed with electronic activity, their screens displaying satellite feeds, intelligence reports, and tactical assessments. She sat at a workstation that had been configured for her specific clearance level, staring at classified documents she had hoped never to see again. The mission briefing was spread across multiple monitors, each piece of information adding another layer to a crisis that was unfolding in real time halfway around the world. "The situation has deteriorated beyond our worst-case projections," Marshall explained, standing behind her as she absorbed the intelligence reports. "Alpha Reed's network has reconstituted itself faster and more effectively than we anticipated. They've acquired assets that make them significantly more dangerous than before." Emma's hands moved across the keyboard, with practiced efficiency cross-referencing tactical assessments with personnel files and operational histories. The familiar rhythm of intelligence analysis felt both natural and deeply unwelcome, like slipping back into clothes that fit perfectly, but carried the smell of smoke and blood. "Chemical weapons," she said quietly, highlighting a section of the briefing that detailed intercepted communications. "They're not just talking about conventional explosives anymore." "Correct," Marshall confirmed. "And according to our sources, they're planning to deploy them against civilian targets in major European cities. The timeline suggests coordinated attacks within the next 72 hours. The weight of that information settled on Emma's shoulders like a familiar burden. 72 hours. Thousands of potential casualties. The kind of ticking clock scenario that had defined too many nights of her military service, when the difference between success and catastrophic failure could be measured in minutes or even seconds. "Why me?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "You have entire teams of analysts who can work this intelligence." "Because you know these people," Marshall replied, pulling up a series of photographs on her secondary monitor. "You've been inside their organizational structure. You understand how they think, how they operate, how they adapt when their plans are compromised." The faces on the screen were achingly familiar. Men and women she had worked alongside while undercover. People who had trusted her with their lives while she gathered intelligence that would ultimately lead to their capture or death. "Alpha Reed," she said, pointing to one of the photographs. "I thought he was killed in the Aleppo raid." "So did we. Turns out he survived and has been rebuilding the network from the ground up," He's learned from previous operational failures, implemented new security protocols, and recruited operatives specifically chosen for their ability to operate in Western environments. Emma studied Al-Farid's file, noting the updates that had been added since her last mission. New associates, changed operational patterns, evidence of technological sophistication that hadn't existed 6 months earlier. The organization she had helped destroy had evolved, adapted, become something more dangerous in its reconstruction. "He knows I'm alive," she said, reading between the lines of the intelligence reports. "He knows I was the source of the intelligence that brought down the original network." "We believe so, yes," Marshall confirmed. "Which is why we need you back in the field. You're the only operative who can identify the new players, predict their strategies, and potentially infiltrate their operations before the attacks are launched." The casual way Marshall delivered that assessment made Emma's blood run cold. Back in the field, the phrase carried implications that she had spent 3 months trying to escape. It meant returning to a world where her survival depended on deception, violence, and the kind of moral compromises that left permanent scars on the soul. "I can't," she said, pushing back from the workstation. "I won't. My name is Emma Hayes, and I'm a freshman art major at Eagle Ridge University. I study for midterms and worry about cafeteria food and whether my roommate thinks I'm weird for making my bed with hospital corners. I don't infiltrate terrorist networks or gather intelligence on chemical weapons attacks." Marshall studied her for a long moment, his expression mixing frustration with something that might have been understanding. "Is that really who you think you are? Because the woman I've been watching for the past few hours, the one who identified sniper positions, neutralized an armed attacker, and coordinated civilian evacuation procedures, she didn't look like someone worried about cafeteria food." The observation stung because it was accurate. From the moment the helicopters had landed, Emma had been operating on instinct and training that she couldn't simply switch off. Her careful performance as a normal college student had crumbled under pressure, revealing the operative underneath. "That doesn't mean I have to go back," she said, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Doesn't it?" Marshall pulled up another screen, this one showing surveillance footage from a train station in Paris. "This was taken yesterday. Recognize anyone?" Emma leaned forward, despite herself, her trained eye automatically analyzing the crowd for familiar faces. It took her less than 30 seconds to spot him. "Nazir Rahman," she said, identifying Al-Farid's logistics coordinator. "He's not supposed to be in Paris. His operational zone was limited to Turkey and northern Syria." "If he's in Europe," Marshall pressed, "what does that tell you?" "It means the attacks are imminent," Emma concluded grimly. "And it means they're using operatives we didn't know. They had people who weren't in our database, who survived the original network's destruction, who have been planning this for months." The implications were staggering. If Al-Farid had been able to place operatives in major European cities without detection, if he had access to chemical weapons and the expertise to deploy them effectively, if he was operating with the kind of sophistication that the surveillance footage suggested, "How many people are we talking about?" Emma asked quietly. "Conservative estimates, 50,000 casualties if they hit their primary targets during peak hours. Could be significantly higher if they coordinate the attacks for maximum psychological impact." 50,000 people. The number was abstract, impossible to truly comprehend. But Emma had seen enough death to understand what it represented. Families destroyed, communities shattered, a level of suffering that would ripple across generations. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Emma glanced at it automatically, a habit from her months of playing student, and saw Rachel's name on the screen. "Hey, are you okay? Campus is still in lockdown, but they're letting us use our phones now. This is all insane. When it's over, can we talk? I mean, really talk?" The normalcy of the message The genuine concern from someone who had become a real friend made Emma's decision even more agonizing. Rachel represented everything she had been trying to build: authentic relationships based on truth rather than operational necessity. A life where her value wasn't measured in successful missions or intelligence gathered. But 50,000 people didn't get to make that choice. They would wake up tomorrow morning worried about their own normal problems: work deadlines, family obligations, weekend plans, without knowing that their continued existence might depend on whether one burned-out 19-year-old operative could summon the courage to return to a life she had desperately wanted to escape. A young lieutenant burst into the room, interrupting Emma's thoughts. "Sir, we've identified the sniper from the clock tower. You need to see this." Marshall followed him to another workstation where surveillance footage from the campus security system was playing. Emma joined them, her curiosity overriding her reluctance to engage further. The footage showed the sniper being led away in handcuffs, his face clearly visible to the cameras. Emma felt her blood run cold as recognition hit her. "Yasser Malik," she said, the name escaping her lips before she could stop it. He was part of Al-Fareed's security detail. Low-level, not inner circle. I never interacted with him directly during my embed, but I saw him at the compound. "Which means the attack on campus wasn't random," Marshall concluded grimly. "Al-Fareed sent him specifically to find you." "But why expose an operative just to verify my location?" Emma asked, her tactical mind already analyzing the implications. "They could have confirmed I was here with simple surveillance. Why the theatrics with explosions and gunfire?" "To test you," Marshall replied, "to see if you'd revert to training under pressure." The lieutenant pulled up another video feed, this one showing the aftermath of Emma's rooftop shot. The precision of the hit, the immediate tactical decisions she'd made, her command presence with Thompson and Rachel, all of it had been captured by the campus security cameras. "They were gathering intelligence on your current capabilities," Marshall continued, "and now they know you haven't lost your edge." A chill ran down Emma's spine as she realized the implications. "Al-Fareed isn't just planning attacks in Europe," she said quietly. "He wanted to make sure I'd be pulled back into service. He's expecting me to be part of the response team." "It's a trap," Marshall agreed. "One specifically designed for you." Emma stared at the surveillance images, seeing her own transformation captured in high definition, the moment when Emma Hayes' art student had become Sergeant Hayes again. The precision with which she'd handled the weapon, the way she'd calculated firing solutions in her head, the instinctive protective stance she'd taken over Rachel. "He studied me," she realized. "He knows how I operate, how I think." "Which is exactly why we need you," Marshall said. "You're the only one who can anticipate his next move because he's anticipating yours. It's a chess match now, and you're our best player." Emma looked back at her phone at Rachel's message still displayed on the screen, then at the satellite imagery of European cities where thousands of people were going about their daily lives unaware of the threat hanging over them. A college student would walk away, would prioritize her own safety, her own peace of mind. But Emma wasn't just a college student anymore. Maybe she never truly had been. "I need guarantees," she said, turning to Marshall. "If I do this when this is over, I want the option to return here, to finish what I started." "Done," Marshall agreed without hesitation. "Full reinstatement to civilian status, continued educational funding, whatever you need." "And protection for Rachel and the others," Emma added. "Al-Fareed has shown he's willing to target my connections here. I want security for the campus until this is resolved." "Already being arranged," Marshall assured her. "A full tactical team will remain at Eagle Ridge until the threat is neutralized." Emma took a deep breath, centering herself the way she'd been trained. This was happening. She was going back into the field, back into the life she'd tried so hard to leave behind. "When do we leave?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Transport is standing by. We'll brief fully en route to Andrews Air Force Base, then deploy to our forward operating location in Germany." Marshall paused, studying her with an unreadable expression. "Are you sure about this, Hayes?" Emma thought about her mother's words written on the back of that photograph hidden in her textbook. "Your courage will light the way home." For 3 months, she'd thought home meant Eagle Ridge, the peaceful life she'd been trying to build. Now she understood that home wasn't a place. It was the ability to live with the choices you made to face yourself in the mirror each morning. "I'm sure," she said simply. As they prepared to leave, Emma took one last look at the message from Rachel. She typed a quick reply, "I'm okay. Have to go away for a while. When I get back, I'll tell you everything. I promise." Then she powered down the phone and handed it to the security officer for safekeeping. Where she was going, civilian connections were a liability she couldn't afford. The military transport hummed beneath them, the steady vibration, a familiar sensation that brought back memories Emma had tried so hard to suppress. Seated in the sparse cabin surrounded by the elite tactical team Marshall had assembled, she felt the last vestiges of her student persona fading away with each passing mile. 90 minutes to Andrews," the pilot announced over the intercom. "Weather clear all the way." Marshall sat across from her, reviewing mission parameters on a secure tablet. He'd been silent for most of the flight, giving her space to process the abrupt transition back to military life. Now he looked up, his expression unreadable in the dim cabin lighting. "We need to talk about what happened in Syria," he said finally. "About why you ran." Emma tensed. This was the conversation she'd been dreading. "That's classified even between us." "Not anymore," Marshall replied, handing her the tablet. "Full operational review. All redactions lifted." Emma took the device with reluctance. On the screen was the after-action report from her final mission, Operation Sandstorm. Her throat tightened as she scrolled through the clinical description of what had been the worst day of her life. "The village wasn't supposed to be there," she said quietly, remembering the mud brick houses that weren't on any of their intelligence maps. Or rather, it wasn't supposed to be inhabited anymore. Marshall nodded. The intelligence was 6 months old. The refugees had returned after the government forces pulled back. 3 families. Emma continued, the images vivid in her memory, despite her efforts to forget. 17 civilians, including 7 children. The report documented the facts in cold, bureaucratic language. During extraction, Sergeant Hayes's team had called in an airstrike on what was believed to be an enemy position. Subsequent BDA battle damage assessment confirmed 17 civilian casualties. No enemy combatants present. "The review board cleared you of any wrongdoing," Marshall pointed out. "The intelligence failure wasn't your responsibility." "I was the one who verified the coordinates," Emma replied, her voice flat. "I was the one who confirmed no civilians present. I was the one who called the strike." She handed the tablet back to him, unable to read any more. "That's why I ran. Not because I couldn't handle the guilt, though God knows there's plenty of that. I ran because I realized I'd become someone who could make that call without hesitation. Someone who could send other people to die based on information I knew might be flawed." "You were doing your job," Marshall said, but there was no conviction in his voice. He'd been in the field long enough to know that such platitudes offered little comfort. "That's the problem," Emma replied. "I was good at a job that requires you to make peace with the unforgivable." Marshall was silent for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that suggested he was reassessing something fundamental about her. "Is that why you chose art?" he asked finally. "About as far from life or death decisions as you could get." Emma nodded. "Art creates. It doesn't destroy. Even when it's challenging or provocative, its purpose is to build something new, not tear something down." "And yet, here you are," Marshall observed, "going back to the destruction business." "Because the alternative is worse," Emma said simply. "Because not acting means accepting 50,000 deaths I might have prevented." And the cabin fell silent again, the hum of the engines, the only sound as they continued their journey eastward. Through the small window, Emma could see the landscape of Montana giving way to the plains of the Midwest, the physical distance from Eagle Ridge growing with each passing minute. Her thoughts turned to Victor Thompson, the Vietnam veteran who had recognized something in her that others had missed. He'd pulled her aside just before they'd boarded the transport. "When I came back from Nam," he'd told her, his voice gruff with emotion, "I spent 20 years trying to outrun what I'd seen, what I'd done. Booze, drugs, moving from town to town, nothing worked. You know what finally did?" Emma had shaken her head, accepting that it was part of me, but not all of me. Thompson had placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "You're trying to cut off a piece of yourself, pretend it doesn't exist. But it's still there, still bleeding. You need to stitch it back together if you ever want to be whole." His words echoed in her mind now as the transport began its descent toward Andrews Air Force Base. Maybe this mission wasn't just about stopping Al-Farid. Maybe it was about reconciling the two versions of herself that she'd been trying to keep separate. The base came into view below them, a sprawling complex of runways, hangars, and administrative buildings. Even at this late hour, it buzzed with activity, the machinery of American military power operating around the clock. As they touched down and taxied toward a secure hangar, Emma felt a strange sense of returning to familiar territory. Not home exactly, but a world whose rules she understood, whose language she spoke fluently. Inside the hangar, a full tactical operations center had been established. Screens displayed satellite imagery, intelligence feeds, and mission planning software. A team of analysts worked at computer stations coordinating with counterparts across multiple agencies and international partners. "Welcome to Operation Gatekeeper," Marshall announced as they entered. "The Joint Task Force assembled to prevent Al-Farid's attack." Emma took in the operation with a professional eye, noting the scale of resources being committed. This wasn't a standard counterterrorism response. This was a major national security priority with presidential authorization behind it. "Hayes," a familiar voice called out. Emma turned to see Captain Sarah Rivera, approaching, a rare smile breaking through her usually stern expression. They had trained together at Fort Bragg, served on 2 joint operations in the Middle East. Rivera was one of the few people in the service Emma had considered a friend, rather than just a colleague. "Rivera," Emma acknowledged, accepting the other woman's brief, firm handshake. "Didn't expect to see you here." "They pulled me from an operation in Colombia when this broke," Rivera explained. "Said they needed everyone who had experience with chemical weapons containment." "And who's on the ground in Europe already?" Emma asked, her mind already thinking ahead to the operational requirements. "Teams in all 3 target cities, Paris, Berlin, London," Rivera replied. "Plus liaison officers with local counterterrorism units. We've got a good framework in place, but we're missing the key piece." "Which is specific targets," Marshall interjected, joining their conversation. "We know the cities, we know the approximate time frame, but we don't know exactly where or how they plan to deploy the agents." "That's where you come in," Rivera added. "Nobody knows Al-Farid's operational patterns like you do." Emma felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. 50,000 lives potentially hanging on her ability to get inside the mind of a man who wanted her dead. "I need everything we have on his movements since Syria," she said, slipping fully into operational mode now. Communication patterns, financial transactions, known associates especially, anyone new who's joined his inner circle. "Already compiled," Marshall said, leading her to a workstation that had been set up specifically for her. Plus, psychological profiles and predictive analysis based on historical attack patterns. Emma sat down and began reviewing the intelligence, her mind automatically cataloging relevant details, identifying patterns, making connections that might not be obvious to analysts who hadn't lived alongside these people for months. "He's changed his security protocols," she noted, scanning through intercepted communications. "New encryption, new cutouts, new dead drop procedures. But the underlying methodology is the same. He still thinks in terms of cellular structure, compartmentalized information, need-to-know basis." "Can you break it?" Marshall asked. Emma didn't answer immediately, her focus intense as she continued analyzing the data. After several minutes, she looked up. "I need to talk to the sniper," she said. "Yasser Malik, the one from campus." Marshall and Rivera exchanged glances. "That's going to be difficult," Rivera said carefully. "Why?" Emma asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "He's dead," Marshall confirmed. "Cyanide capsule in a hollowed-out molar. Activated it during transport." "Suicide protocol," Emma mused. "That's new. Alpha Reed's people were ideologically committed before, but not to that extent. Not willing to die rather than be captured." "Which suggests," Marshall prompted. "New backing," Emma concluded. "Someone with experience in high-level covert operations. Someone who understands the value of preventing interrogation." She turned back to the intelligence feeds, searching for connections that might reveal this new partner. The data blurred before her eyes as fatigue began to set in. The adrenaline of the day's events finally wearing off, leaving her exhausted both physically and mentally. "You need rest," Marshall observed. "We've got quarters prepared. 6 hours of downtime, then final briefing before deployment." Emma wanted to argue to insist she could continue working, but she knew he was right. Combat effectiveness depended on proper rest, as much as proper training. She'd be no good to anyone if she crashed from exhaustion in the middle of the operation. "Wake me if anything changes," she instructed, rising from the workstation. "One more thing," Marshall said, handing her a small case. "Your service weapon. Cleaned, inspected, and loaded to your specifications." Emma opened the case to reveal a Glock 19 with custom grip modifications and tritium night sights, her personal sidearm from her active duty days. Seeing it again was like encountering an old friend, albeit one with complicated associations. "How did you—" "It was in your effects at the hospital in Germany," Marshall explained. "Standard procedure to secure and store an operator's personal weapon." Emma closed the case without touching the gun. "I'll retrieve it before deployment." "Hayes," Marshall called as she turned to go. When she looked back, his expression had softened slightly. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this, that we had to pull you back in." Emma considered his words, searching for the appropriate response. In the end, she settled for simple honesty. "So am I," she said. "But here we are." The quarters assigned to her were Spartan, but functional, a small room with a single bed, desk, and attached bathroom. Standard temporary accommodations for personnel in transit. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day crashing over her in waves now that she was alone. 12 hours ago, she had been a college freshman, worried about her midterm in Professor Miller's class. Now she was Sergeant Hayes again, preparing for a high-risk counterterrorism operation halfway around the world. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the photograph she'd taken from her psychology textbook before leaving Eagle Ridge, the one of her and her mother, at Camp Pendleton. In the dim light of the quarters, her mother's handwriting on the back seemed to glow with special significance. "Your courage will light the way home." Emma had always interpreted those words as encouragement for her military service, her mother's blessing for the path she had chosen to follow. Now she wondered if there had been a deeper meaning. Perhaps courage wasn't just about facing external dangers. Perhaps it was also about facing the truth of who you were, all parts of yourself, even those you wished didn't exist. She placed the photograph on the small bedside table and lay down, not bothering to remove her clothes or boots. Despite her exhaustion, sleep seemed impossible with her mind racing through mission parameters, threat assessments, and the faces of the people she'd left behind at Eagle Ridge. But her body had different ideas. Years of military training had taught her to sleep whenever the opportunity presented itself, regardless of circumstances. Within minutes, she had drifted into the shallow, alert rest of a soldier in a combat zone, ready to snap to full awareness at the slightest disturbance. Her last conscious thought was of Rachel's face, when she'd realized the truth about her roommate, the hurt, the confusion, but also something else. Something that might have been understanding given time to develop. Time she might never have again. Emma woke precisely 6 hours later, her internal clock as reliable as any alarm. For a disorienting moment, she expected to see the familiar surroundings of her dorm room at Eagle Ridge, Rachel's cluttered side of the room, the morning light filtering through cheap blinds, the distant sounds of students heading to early classes. Instead, she found herself in military quarters, the reality of her situation rushing back with crystal clarity. She was no longer pretending to be Emma Hayes' freshman art student. She was Sergeant Hayes again, preparing for a mission with thousands of lives at stake. After a quick shower and change into the tactical clothing provided for her black BDUs, with no identifying insignia or rank, she made her way back to the operations center. The atmosphere had intensified overnight, with additional personnel and equipment now crowding the space. Whatever had been set in motion was accelerating rapidly. Marshall spotted her immediately and waved her over to a briefing table where several senior officers had gathered around a holographic display of major European cities. "Hayes, good timing," he said. "We've had a development." "What kind?" Emma asked, studying the faces around the table for clues. "One of Al-Farid's lieutenants was captured by French counterterrorism forces 2 hours ago," Marshall explained. "Rahman, the one you identified from the Paris surveillance footage." Emma felt a surge of hope. "Has he talked?" "Not yet," Marshall replied. "But they found this on him." He handed her a tablet, displaying photographs of documents recovered from Rahman. Emma scrolled through them rapidly, her trained eye picking out significant details. "These are partial schematics," she said, enlarging one of the images. "HVAC systems for some kind of public building." "3 buildings, actually," Marshall corrected. "1 in each target city. The French are still working to identify them based on the fragmentary information." Emma continued examining the documents, her mind racing to connect the pieces. This makes sense for chemical agent deployment. Introduce the compound into the ventilation system, maximize dispersal throughout the structure. "That's our assessment as well," agreed a gray-haired man at the table whom Emma didn't recognize. "Dr. James Wilkins, DHS Chemical Threat Analysis Division." He introduced himself, noting her questioning glance. "The partial schematics suggest they're targeting buildings with high civilian occupancy and limited exit points." "Transportation hubs," Emma concluded. "Train stations or airports would be my guess. Maximum casualties, maximum panic, maximum economic disruption." "That's consistent with Al-Farid's previous targeting strategies," Marshall agreed. But we need to narrow it down. There are dozens of potential targets in each city. Emma stared at the documents, searching for distinguishing features that might identify the specific locations. Then something caught her eye, a notation in the corner of one schematic partially obscured, but still readable. "This is Cyrillic," she said, pointing to the marking. "Russian engineering annotation." "That's significant," Dr. Wilkins asked. "It could be," Emma replied. "Many major European transit hubs were built or renovated with Soviet engineering assistance during the Cold War, especially in Berlin. If these are Russian technical documents, that could narrow our search considerably." Marshall was already relaying this information to the intelligence team, directing them to cross-reference Soviet engineering projects with major transportation centers in the target cities. "There's something else," Emma added, continuing to study the documents. "These schematics are old, at least 30 years judging by the drafting style and notation format. They may not reflect current configurations." "Which means," Dr. Wilkins prompted, "which means Al-Farid would need current information to plan the attacks effectively," Emma explained. "He'd need someone on the inside, someone with access to updated plans or the ability to conduct on-site reconnaissance." Marshall nodded in understanding. "Sleeper agents or recruited assets within the target facilities." "Exactly," Emma confirmed. "And that gives us another angle to pursue. We need to check recent hiring at potential targets, unusual access requests, security breaches, anything that might indicate someone gathering information." The intelligence team immediately began implementing this new line of inquiry, analysts typing furiously at workstations as they communicated with counterparts in Europe. Hayes Marshall said, drawing her aside as the briefing table cleared, "You're scheduled to deploy to Frankfurt in 90 minutes. Joint Special Operations Command has established a forward operating base there to coordinate the multinational response." Emma nodded mentally, preparing for the next phase of the operation. "What's my specific role?" "Intelligence analysis and operational planning, primarily," Marshall replied. "Your knowledge of Al-Farid's organization makes you our best asset for anticipating his next move." Emma heard what he wasn't saying. "But not field operations." "Not initially, no," Marshall confirmed. "You've been out of active service for 3 months. Standard protocol would require recertification before putting you back in the field." "We don't have time for standard protocol," Emma pointed out. "And you know I'm your best option for identifying Al-Farid's people on the ground." Marshall studied her for a long moment, weighing operational necessity against procedural requirements. "We'll reassess when we reach Frankfurt," he said finally. "For now, focus on the intelligence angle. Help us narrow down these targets." Emma accepted this compromise, knowing that arguing further would only waste valuable time. Instead, she returned to her workstation and immersed herself in the flood of information now pouring in from European intelligence services. For the next hour, she analyzed potential targets, cross-referencing architectural specifications with occupancy patterns and security protocols. Her experience with Al-Farid's operational methodology allowed her to eliminate possibilities that didn't fit his typical approach, gradually narrowing the field of potential targets. "I think I've got something," she called to Marshall, who immediately joined her at the workstation. 3 facilities, all with Soviet engineering connections, all with high civilian traffic patterns, and all with recent security anomalies reported. She displayed the locations on the main screen: Gare du Nord in Paris, Berlin, Hauptbahnhof, and Victoria Station in London. "What kind of security anomalies?" Marshall asked. "Different in each location, but all concerning," Emma replied. "Unauthorized access to maintenance areas at Gare du Nord 3 days ago. Unexplained server outage affecting security cameras at Berlin Hauptbahnhof last week. and a maintenance contractor at Victoria Station whose credentials were flagged as potentially fraudulent but never fully investigated. "It's thin," Marshall observed, "but it's the best lead we have. I'll alert the teams in each city to focus on these locations." As the operation room erupted into coordinated activity, Emma felt a growing certainty that they were on the right track. The pattern fit Al-Farid's methodology: multiple simultaneous targets, thorough advance preparation, exploitation of security vulnerabilities. But something still bothered her, a piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. "Marshall," she said, "why train stations and not airports would have tighter security, but they'd also potentially affect international travelers, creating a truly global impact." Marshall considered this. "What's your assessment?" "I think we're missing something," Emma replied. "The targets make sense tactically, but not strategically, not if Al-Farid wants to maximize the psychological impact beyond Europe." She returned to the intelligence files, searching for any indication of Al-Farid's broader strategic objectives. What she found sent a chill down her spine. "The NATO defense ministers' meeting," she said, looking up from her screen. "It's scheduled for tomorrow in Berlin. Representatives from all member nations will be present." Marshall immediately grasped the implications. "Including the U.S. Secretary of Defense." "Berlin Hauptbahnhof is the primary arrival point for delegates," Emma continued. "If Al-Farid times the attack to coincide with their arrival, he could potentially decapitate NATO's military leadership in a single strike." Marshall finished her thought. "Plus, achieve mass casualties among civilians." "It's exactly the kind of high-value, high-visibility target he'd prioritize," Emma confirmed. "And it explains why he's accelerated his timeline." Marshall was already on the secure line to EUCOM, ordering enhanced security protocols for all NATO delegates and alerting German authorities to the specific threat to Berlin Hauptbahnhof. "The transport to Frankfurt leaves in 20 minutes, he told Emma after completing the call. "Grab your gear. You've just made yourself essential to the field operation." Emma nodded, a complex mix of emotions churning beneath her professional exterior. Part of her, the part that had been trying to build a normal life at Eagle Ridge, recoiled at being pulled back into high-stakes operations. But another part, the part that had spent years training for exactly this kind of crisis, felt the familiar surge of focus and clarity that came with having a clear mission and purpose. As she gathered her equipment and headed for the waiting C-17 transport aircraft, her phone buzzed with an incoming message. She had forgotten she'd retrieved it from security before leaving her quarters. The message was from Rachel. "They're letting us back on campus tomorrow. Your side of the room feels empty without you. Be safe out there, whoever you are. And remember, you've got someone waiting for you to come back." Emma stared at the message, suddenly struck by the stark contrast between the world she was heading into and the one she'd left behind. Rachel's simple concern, her willingness to still care despite the deception, made the weight of Emma's responsibility feel both heavier and more meaningful. She typed a quick reply, "Take care of my art supplies. I'll need them when I get back." It was a promise she wasn't certain she could keep, but one she desperately wanted to believe in as the massive transport aircraft lifted off, carrying her toward whatever awaited in Europe. The flight to Frankfurt was a blur of mission preparation and intelligence updates. Emma spent most of the 8-hour journey immersed in tactical planning, coordinating with teams already on the ground in the 3 target cities. As they began their descent into Rhine-Main Air Base, Marshall joined her in the cargo hold, where she had been reviewing security protocols for Berlin Hauptbahnhof. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice pitched low enough that the others couldn't hear. Emma looked up from her work, surprised by the personal nature of the question. "I'm operational," she replied, defaulting to military assessment language. "That's not what I asked," Marshall persisted. "You went from college freshman to counter-terrorism operative in less than 24 hours. That's a psychological transition most people couldn't manage. Emma considered this, then decided on honesty. I'm compartmentalizing, focusing on the mission parameters, not the circumstances that brought me here. And after, Marshall pressed. When this is over, one crisis at a time, Colonel, Emma replied, returning to her work. Right now, all that matters is stopping Al-Farid. Marshall nodded, accepting her deflection. We land in 15 minutes. There's a joint tactical operations center set up at the base. Full briefing on arrival. The Rhine main airbase hummed with activity as their transport touched down. Despite the late hour, the facility was fully operational with military and intelligence personnel from multiple NATO countries coordinating the response to the threat. As they deplaned, Emma was struck by the international nature of the operation. American, British, French, and German personnel moved with purpose across the tarmac, united by the common goal of preventing mass casualties on European soil. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, screens displayed real-time surveillance of the 3 target stations. Security teams were already implementing enhanced protection measures, though they were attempting to do so without creating public panic that might play into the terrorists' hands. Sergeant Hayes, a British officer, greeted her as she entered. Colonel Marshall briefed us on your unique insight into Al-Farid's operation. We're grateful to have you on board. Emma nodded acknowledgement, immediately focusing on the surveillance feeds. What's the current status of security enhancements? Underway at all 3 locations, the officer replied. Covert deployment of chemical detection equipment, enhanced CCTV monitoring, plainclothes security personnel, integrated with regular staff. The challenge is doing all this without alerting potential operatives already in place. And the NATO delegates, Emma asked. Change of arrival protocols implemented, he confirmed. They'll be using alternate transportation methods to reach the conference center. Berlin Hauptbahnhof has been quietly removed from their itinerary. Good, Emma said, but not enough. Al-Farid will have contingency plans. He'll have people watching for exactly these kinds of security adjustments. What do you recommend? Asked a German intelligence officer who had joined the conversation. Emma studied the surveillance feeds, her mind working through various scenarios. We need to identify his operatives before they can deploy the chemical agents. And to do that, we need to understand exactly how they plan to introduce the agents into the ventilation systems. She turned to the technical team monitoring the HVAC schematics. Based on the documents recovered in Paris, what's the most likely point of introduction for the chemical agents? A technician highlighted several areas on the station blueprints. These maintenance access points would provide direct entry to the primary air handling units. They're required by safety regulations to be accessible for emergency repairs, which makes them vulnerable. Emma studied the locations. And current security on these access points. Standard locks, some with electronic keypads, the technician replied. But a maintenance worker with proper credentials wouldn't raise suspicions accessing them. That's our vulnerability, Emma concluded. We need surveillance on every one of these access points, plus rapid response teams positioned nearby. Already being implemented, the British officer assured her. But we're spread thin across 3 major transportation hubs in 3 different countries. Emma made a decision. We need to prioritize. Berlin is the primary target. It's where Al-Farid can achieve both mass casualties and a strategic strike against NATO leadership, even with the changed arrival protocols. The Paris and London attacks may be diversionary. Marshall, who had been conferring with senior commanders, rejoined the group. Hayes is right. Intelligence suggests heightened activity in Berlin specifically. We're shifting additional resources there now. I need to be on the ground, Emma said, the words coming before she'd fully formed the thought. In Berlin, today. Marshall studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Tactical team is prepping now. Wheels up in 30 minutes. As Emma gathered her equipment for the short flight to Berlin, she found herself mentally shifting into an operational mindset she hadn't accessed in months. The situational awareness threat assessment protocols and tactical decision-making processes that had once been second nature were returning with surprising ease. Emma Hayes, freshman art student, was fading further into the background with each passing hour. In her place stood Sergeant Hayes, Delta Force operator, preparing once again to face the man whose organization she had infiltrated and destroyed. The man who now wanted her dead, almost as much as he wanted to strike a devastating blow against the Western powers he blamed for the destruction of his homeland. The helicopter ride to Berlin was brief but tense. Emma sat among a team of multinational special operators, each focused on their own mental preparation for what lay ahead. The atmosphere was one she knew well, the controlled intensity of highly trained professionals about to enter a potentially lethal situation. As the helicopter approached Berlin, Emma looked out at the city lights spread below them. Somewhere in that urban landscape, Al-Fareed's operatives were making their final preparations. And somewhere, perhaps, Al-Fareed himself was waiting, expecting her to come. The trap was set. But Emma Hayes had no intention of being the prey. The Berlin Operations Center had been established in a secure government facility near the Hauptbahnhof, Germany's largest train station. As Emma entered, she was struck by the controlled chaos of a major counterterrorism operation in progress. Intelligence analysts hunched over computer terminals, tactical teams reviewed station schematics, and senior officials from multiple agencies coordinated response protocols. Captain Rivera, who had arrived hours earlier, greeted Emma with a nod. "Glad you made it. We've got developments." She led Emma to a monitoring station where surveillance feeds from throughout the massive train station were displayed on multiple screens. The Hauptbahnhof was a marvel of modern architecture, 5 levels of glass and steel spanning the Spree River, with over 200 trains arriving and departing daily. "We've identified 3 potential suspects based on the parameters you provided," Rivera explained, bringing up surveillance images of individuals moving through the station. "All match the behavioral patterns you flagged: repeated visits to maintenance areas, communication protocols consistent with Al-Fareed's network backgrounds that don't fully check out." Emma studied the images, analyzing posture, movement patterns, situational awareness, the subtle indicators that separated trained operatives from civilians. Her attention focused on one man in particular, mid-30s, well-dressed in a maintenance uniform that looked slightly too new, constantly scanning his surroundings with the practiced casualness of someone trained to appear normal while maintaining tactical awareness. "Him," she said, pointing to the third image. "The others might be support, but he's the primary operator. The way he moves, the way he's constantly aware of camera positions and security personnel, he's had professional training." Rivera nodded in agreement. Facial recognition got a partial match. Karim Nassar, former Iraqi Special Forces, disappeared after the fall of Baghdad in 2003. Suspected of involvement in insurgent activities but dropped off the radar around 2015. That timing would coincide with his recruitment by Al-Fareed, Emma noted. "What's his current position in the station? Maintenance contractor. Has legitimate credentials that passed initial security screening. He's been working at the Hauptbahnhof for 3 weeks." Emma felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. Perfect placement for reconnaissance and preparation. "Where is he now?" "Level 3 East Wing," Rivera replied, highlighting the location on a station schematic. "He's been making routine maintenance rounds all morning, but he's gradually moving toward the primary air handling units." Time frame for potential attack. Intelligence suggests between 1400 and 1600 hours. Peak afternoon traffic, maximum civilian presence. Emma checked her watch, 11:37. Less than 3 hours to identify the method of attack and neutralize the threat. We need eyes on him constantly, she instructed. And I need to get into the station. If he's the primary operator, he'll be coordinating with others. I might recognize support personnel that your facial recognition won't catch. Rivera hesitated. Marshall's orders were for you to remain in the operations center, providing intelligence support. And that's exactly what I'm doing, Emma countered. But I can do it more effectively on the ground. I know these people, Rivera. I lived with them, trained with them. I can spot their operational signatures in ways that surveillance algorithms can't. After a moment's consideration, Rivera nodded. I'll clear it with tactical command, but you'll need to maintain comms at all times, and you'll have a security team shadowing you. Understood. 30 minutes later, Emma moved through the crowded Hauptbahnhof, dressed in civilian clothes, with a small radio earpiece providing constant updates from the operations center. A 3-person security team maintained distance positioned to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to avoid alerting potential hostiles. The massive station hummed with activity, thousands of travelers moving between platforms, shopping in the retail areas, dining in the food courts. Most were oblivious to the potential threat in their midst, though Emma noted the increased presence of plainclothes security personnel strategically positioned throughout the facility. Target is moving to level 4, Rivera's voice informed her through the earpiece, approaching maintenance corridor C. Emma adjusted her path, taking an escalator to the upper level. As she moved, her eyes constantly scanned the crowds, assessing each face, each movement pattern, looking for the subtle indicators that would identify Al-Farid's operatives. Near a coffee shop on level 4, she paused, pretending to check her phone while maintaining line of sight to maintenance corridor C. After a moment, Nassar emerged, now carrying a small tool bag that hadn't been present in earlier surveillance footage. Something about the way he carried it slightly away from his body with unusual care triggered Emma's suspicions. The bag was the right size to contain a small pressurized container of chemical agent. Rivera Target has acquired a tool bag approximately 30 to 20 centimeters. Based on his handling, I believe it contains the chemical agent. Copy that. Tactical team is on standby. Do we move now? Emma watched as Nassar checked his watch, then spoke briefly into what appeared to be a maintenance radio. The timing suggested coordination with others. Negative, she replied. He's communicating with someone. If we move now, we risk alerting other operatives who may have separate deployment mechanisms. We need to identify his contacts first. She continued observing as Nassar made his way toward the central atrium of the station. His path would take him past the primary air handling units for the upper levels, the most efficient point to introduce a chemical agent for maximum dispersal. Emma maintained her distance, moving parallel to his path, while scanning the surrounding areas for potential collaborators. Her attention was drawn to a woman seated at a cafe table near Nassar's projected route. Something about her posture and positioning seemed calculated rather than casual. Possible second operative at the Café Europa northeast corner of the atrium, Emma reported. Woman, dark hair, blue coat, reading newspaper but maintaining sightlines to Nassar. Acknowledged. Facial recognition is running. As Nassar approached the cafe, Emma noticed a subtle exchange, not quite eye contact, but a mutual awareness that confirmed her suspicion. The woman folded her newspaper and stood moving to intercept Nassar's path in what would appear to casual observers as a random crossing of trajectories. They're about to make contact, Emma reported, moving closer to better observe the exchange. The brush pass was expertly executed, a momentary crossing of paths during which the woman slipped something small into Nassar's jacket pocket. If Emma hadn't been specifically watching for it, she would have missed it entirely. Target has received an object from the female suspect, she reported, Small, possibly an activation key or detonator. Facial recognition confirms the woman is Layla Jabri, Rivera responded. Known associate of Al-Farid. Tactical teams are moving to intercept both suspects. Emma watched as plainclothes security personnel began converging on the two targets. The operation was about to transition from surveillance to interdiction. But something felt wrong. The exchange had been too obvious, the timing too convenient. Al-Farid's operations were characterized by multiple layers of security-redundant systems, fail-safes. "Wait," Emma said urgently. "This is too easy. It's—" Before she could complete her thought, Nassar suddenly stopped walking and looked directly at her. Despite the distance and the crowds, their eyes met with unmistakable recognition. A slight smile crossed his face. Not surprise, but confirmation. He'd known she was there all along. "Abort!" Emma shouted into her comms. "It's a trap they're drawing in the response teams." Even as she spoke, Nassar dropped the tool bag and sprinted toward an emergency exit. The woman at the cafe simultaneously produced a small device from her pocket and pressed a button before security personnel could reach her. Throughout the station, alarm systems suddenly activated not the standard evacuation alarms but security protocols that automatically sealed emergency exits and fire doors. The hacked system had just turned the station's safety features into a trap confining everyone inside. "All teams be advised," Rivera's voice came through with urgent clarity. "Station security systems have been compromised. Primary threat may not be chemical. Repeat, primary threat may not be chemical." Emma was already moving, pushing through the suddenly panicked crowd toward Nassar's last position. The discarded tool bag remained on the floor, surrounded by wary security personnel who were treating it as a potential chemical weapon. "The bag's a decoy," Emma called to them as she passed. "Focus on the structural systems." She followed the path Nassar had taken, tracking him through the confusion toward a service area marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The door was secured with an electronic keypad, but Nassar had left it slightly ajar in his haste. Emma drew her sidearm, the Glock 19, that Marshall had returned to her, and approached the door cautiously. Behind it lay a maintenance corridor that provided access to the station's critical infrastructure. "Rivera, I'm pursuing Nassar into the East Service Corridor," she reported. "I believe he's headed for the main electrical or ventilation controls." "Copy that. Be advised we're detecting unauthorized access to the station's computer systems. Someone is attempting to override environmental controls." Emma moved down the corridor, weapon at low-ready, senses hyper-alert for any sign of Nassar or additional hostiles. The passage led to a central control room filled with monitoring equipment for the station's various systems. As she approached the control room door, she heard voices inside multiple speakers, one of whom was Nassar. The conversation was in Arabic, a dialect specific to Iraq's northern regions. "Configuration is complete," Nassar was saying. The American woman followed as predicted. "And the security response?" asked another voice, older, authoritative, hauntingly familiar. "Exactly as you anticipated," Nassar replied. "They're focused on the decoy chemical threat, while our primary systems come online." Emma felt her blood run cold as she recognized the second voice. Al-Farid himself was in the control room, not coordinating remotely, as they had assumed, but personally overseeing the operation. This wasn't just an attack on a transportation hub. It was a carefully orchestrated trap, and she had walked right into it. Emma activated her comms. "Rivera, be advised Al-Farid is on site. Repeat, Al-Farid is personally at the location. I need immediate tactical support at the Environmental Control Room East Corridor." "Copy that. Teams are encountering resistance throughout the station." Estimate 7 minutes until support can reach your position. 7 minutes. Too long. Emma assessed her options. The longer she waited, the more time Al-Farid had to execute whatever his true plan entailed. The prudent tactical choice would be to maintain position and wait for backup. But Sergeant Emma Hayes hadn't earned her reputation by always making the prudent choice. Taking a deep breath, she moved to the door and prepared to breach. Standard entry protocol, quick scan of the room, identify threats, neutralize in order of priority. She'd done it hundreds of times in training, dozens of times in actual operations. With practiced efficiency, she pushed through the door, sweeping her weapon across the room as she entered. Federal agents, hands where I can see them. 3 men occupied the control room. Nassar stood at a computer terminal, hands frozen above the keyboard at her entrance. A second man, younger, nervous, was stationed by a separate monitoring system. And at the center of the room, appearing completely unsurprised by her entrance, stood Mustafa Al-Farid. He was older than in the intelligence photos, the stress of the past months evident in the new lines on his face and the gray in his beard. But his eyes were the same intelligent, calculating, burning with a cold intensity that Emma remembered all too well from her time embedded in his organization. "Sergeant Hayes," he said, his voice as calm as if they were meeting for a scheduled appointment. "Or do you prefer to be called Emma, now I've been expecting you?" "Step away from the controls," Emma ordered, keeping her weapon trained on him while maintaining awareness of the other 2 men. "Hands behind your head, all of you." Al-Farid made no move to comply. "I think not. You see, you're not actually in control of this situation. You never were." As if on cue, the younger man at the monitoring station pressed a key, and screens around the room lit up with camera feeds from throughout the station. Emma saw with horror that each feed showed a small device attached to structural support columns, not chemical weapons, but conventional explosives strategically placed to collapse the entire facility. 47 charges, Al-Farid explained conversationally, enough to bring down this architectural marvel and everyone in it, including, I should note, the NATO security teams who arrived this morning, disguised as maintenance personnel, the same teams that were supposed to protect the defense ministers had they kept their original travel plans. Emma kept her weapon steady, mind racing through options. The chemical threat was never real. "Oh, it was real enough," Al-Farid replied. "Just not for today. The chemicals exist, the plans were genuine, but they served their purpose to draw out the security response we wanted to study and to bring you back into the field." This was about me." Al-Farid smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "In part. You destroyed years of my work, Sergeant Hayes. You lived among us, broke bread with us, gained our trust, and then you betrayed us. Such actions have consequences. Your work was planning mass casualty attacks against civilians," Emma replied evenly. "I did what was necessary to prevent thousands of deaths." "And caused dozens in the process," Al-Farid countered. "The airstrike on our compound killed 17 of my people. Not soldiers, not terrorists, family members, support staff, children." The words hit Emma like physical blows, reopening wounds that had never fully healed. The unauthorized strike that had gone wrong. The civilian casualties that haunted her dreams. Al-Farid knew exactly where to push. "That wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her voice tight. "The intelligence was flawed." Al-Farid finished for her. "Yes, I'm familiar with that excuse. The great powers make mistakes that kill our people, then express regret while preparing to make the same mistakes again." His expression hardened. "But today the mistake is yours. You walked into this trap exactly as I predicted." And now what?" Emma asked, fighting to maintain her professional demeanor despite the emotional turmoil his words had triggered. You detonate the explosives, kill thousands of innocent people, and die in the process. What does that accomplish? Justice, Al-Farid replied simply. Or perhaps balance is a better word. Your people have brought war, destruction, and chaos to my homeland for decades. Today, I bring a small measure of that chaos to yours. As he spoke, Emma noticed Nassar's hand moving slowly toward a device on the control panel, likely the detonator for the explosives. Her grip tightened on her weapon. Rivera, she said quietly into her comms, be advised multiple explosive devices throughout the station. Evacuation priority Alpha. Repeat, evacuation priority Alpha. Copy that, came the tense reply. Evacuation protocols initiating. Tactical team still 4 minutes out. 4 minutes. Too long. You won't accomplish anything with this attack, Emma told Al-Farid, stalling for time while security began evacuating the station. Except ensuring that more innocent people die on both sides. An interesting moral position from someone with your record, Al-Farid observed. How many operations have you participated in, Sergeant Hayes? How many lives have you taken in the name of your country's security? Emma didn't answer, but something in her expression must have confirmed his assessment. We are not so different, you and I, he continued, both willing to kill for what we believe is right. The only difference is the flag we serve. The difference, Emma replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside, is that I recognized what I was becoming and walked away. I chose to stop the cycle of violence rather than perpetuate it. For the first time, she saw a flicker of genuine emotion cross Al-Farid's face. Not anger, but something more complex. Recognition, perhaps. Even respect. And yet, here you are, he said softly, gun in hand, ready to kill again. Did you really walk away, Sergeant Hayes? Or did you just tell yourself that comforting lie while waiting for the call to return? The question struck at the heart of everything Emma had been struggling with since leaving the military hospital in Germany. Had her attempt at civilian life been genuine, or merely a temporary escape from responsibilities she couldn't truly abandon? Before she could respond, Nassar made his move, lunging for the detonator on the control panel. Emma's training took over target acquisition, trigger control, follow-through, all happening in the fraction of a second between recognition and action. The shot echoed in the confined space of the control room. Nassar collapsed before his hand could reach the detonator. The younger man at the monitoring station panicked, reaching for something at his waist, a weapon or possibly a secondary detonator. Emma pivoted her second shot, catching him in the shoulder and spinning him away from the controls. Al-Farid hadn't moved. He stood watching the violence unfold with the detached interest of a man who had seen too much death to be disturbed by more. Well executed, he commented as Emma turned her attention back to him. Your skills haven't deteriorated during your time playing student. It's over, Al-Farid, Emma said, moving carefully to secure the detonator while keeping her weapon trained on him. Your people are neutralized. The station is being evacuated, and tactical teams will be here in minutes. Perhaps, he acknowledged. But do you really think this was my only operation? My only plan? You've stopped one attack, Sergeant Hayes. Congratulations. But there will be others in other cities on other days. The war you tried to escape will continue with or without either of us. Emma heard footsteps in the corridor outside the tactical team arriving at last. In seconds, the room would be secured, Al-Farid would be in custody, and the immediate threat would be neutralized. But his words lingered, raising questions that couldn't be answered so easily. Was there any real escape from the cycle of violence that had defined both their lives? Or were they destined to remain locked in this deadly dance, each action provoking a reaction, each attack justifying a counterattack. Federal agents down on the ground. The tactical team burst through the door, weapons raised, shouting commands. Al-Farid slowly raised his hands, his eyes never leaving Emma's. "Until next time, Sergeant Hayes," he said quietly, before the tactical team forced him to his knees and secured his hands behind his back. As he was led away, Emma felt the adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation beginning to ebb, leaving in its wake a bone-deep exhaustion that was both physical and spiritual. She had stopped the attack. Al-Farid was in custody. By any objective measure, the operation had been a success. Yet, as she stood in the control room surrounded by the aftermath of violence, she couldn't escape the feeling that this victory had come at the cost of the new identity she had been trying to build, that in saving others, she had lost something vital of herself. Hayes. Rivera appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you injured?" Emma shook her head. "I'm fine." Rivera didn't look convinced but accepted the assessment. "Marshall's on secure comms, wants a full debrief immediately." Emma nodded, holstering her weapon and following Rivera out of the control room. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but she knew from experience that the aftermath of such operations could be equally challenging: the investigations, the intelligence analysis, the preparation for potential follow-up threats. As they walked through the now empty corridors of the Hauptbahnhof, Rivera glanced at her. "For what it's worth, what you did today, it mattered. Thousands of people are alive because of your actions." Emma appreciated the sentiment, but found herself unable to take comfort in it. The line between heroism and trauma had always been thin in her experience. The same actions that saved lives often left lasting scars on those who performed them. "What will happen to Al-Farid?" she asked. "Interrogation, intelligence extraction, then trial for terrorism charges," Rivera replied. "Given the evidence against him, he'll never see freedom again." Emma nodded, but found herself wondering if imprisonment would truly end the threat Al-Farid represented. His network remained active, his ideology undefeated. And his words about the continuing cycle of violence resonated with concerns she'd harbored since long before coming to Eagle Ridge. As they reached the Mobile Command Center established outside the station, Emma paused, looking back at the massive glass and steel structure that had nearly become a monument to tragedy. The sun was setting behind it, casting long shadows across the plaza, where evacuated civilians were still being processed by security personnel. In that moment, standing between the ordered military efficiency of the command center and the chaos of the civilian evacuation, Emma felt suspended between her two identities: the soldier she had been trained to be and the student she had tried to become. The question that had haunted her since leaving the military hospital in Germany remained unanswered. Was there a way to reconcile these two versions of herself, or would she always be torn between them, never fully belonging to either world? With a deep breath, she turned away from the setting sun and walked into the command center where Marshall waited for her report, and the next phase of the operation was already being planned. The mission continued, and for now, so did she. 2 days after the Berlin operation, Emma sat in a secure briefing room at EUCOM headquarters in Stuttgart, watching as intelligence analysts presented their findings on the dismantled terrorist network. The operation had expanded well beyond the initial threat to transportation hubs, uncovering cells in 6 European countries, and preventing what would have been the most significant attack on NATO facilities since the organization's founding. Colonel Marshall stood at the head of the briefing table, coordinating the multinational response with his characteristic efficiency. Since Al-Farid's capture, dozens of his associates had been identified and apprehended, their safe houses raided, their financial networks frozen. By any objective measure, The mission had been an extraordinary success. Emma should have felt satisfied, even proud of her contribution. Instead, she found herself increasingly detached from the proceedings, her mind returning again and again to the conversation with Alpha Reed in that control room. Hayes, Marshall's voice broke through her thoughts. "You're needed in communications. Secure call from Andrews." Emma nodded and left the briefing, making her way through the labyrinthine headquarters to the Secure Communications Center. The facility housed state-of-the-art encryption technology that allowed for real-time communication with military installations worldwide. The communications officer directed her to a private booth, equipped with a secure video terminal. "Priority channel from JSOC headquarters authenticated at Omega level," he informed her. "I'll give you privacy." Emma sat at the terminal and entered her security credentials. The screen flickered to life, revealing Captain Rivera's face. Something in her expression immediately put Emma on alert, the tightness around her eyes, the rigid set of her jaw. "Rivera, what's going on?" Emma asked without preamble. "We have a situation," Rivera replied, her voice tense, even through the encrypted connection. "Eagle Ridge University was attacked 90 minutes ago." Emma felt her blood turn to ice. "What? How? Who?" Initial assessment suggests it was Alpha Reed's people. A small tactical team infiltrated the campus, overwhelmed security, and took hostages. "Casualties?" Emma managed to ask through the shock. "2 campus security officers wounded, no fatalities reported yet." "But Hayes? They've issued specific demands." "What demands?" Rivera's expression grew even more grim. "They want you. Direct exchange you for the hostages." Emma's mind raced through the implications. How did they even know to target Eagle Ridge? That connection wasn't public. "We believe there was a security breach, someone with access to your file. The details of your civilian cover were compromised." "Who are the hostages?" Emma asked, dreading the answer. Rivera hesitated before responding. 8 students and 2 faculty members, including your roommate Rachel Wilson and Professor Diana Miller. The news hit Emma like a physical blow. Rachel and Professor Miller targeted specifically because of their connection to her. Innocent people whose only mistake had been befriending someone they didn't truly know. "There's more," Rivera continued. "They've set a deadline. 24 hours for you to surrender yourself at the campus, or they start executing hostages." Emma's training took over, pushing aside the emotional response in favor of tactical assessment. "What assets do we have in place?" FBI hostage rescue team deployed from Quantico, local tactical units establishing perimeter control. Full surveillance package negotiation team on site. But they're well equipped and have secured a defensible position in the administration building. "And what's the official response to their demand?" Rivera's expression told her everything before she even spoke. "Official policy is no negotiation with terrorists, no exchanges, no concessions." "Which means those hostages die if we follow protocol," Emma concluded flatly. "Marshall is working diplomatic channels, trying to leverage Alpha Reed's cooperation in exchange for considerations at his trial. But it's a long shot. The operational assessment is not optimistic." Emma made her decision in that moment, though she suspected she'd made it the second she heard Rachel's name among the hostages. "I need transport back to the States, immediately." Rivera's eyes widened slightly. "Hayes, you can't be seriously considering—" "I'm not considering anything," Emma interrupted. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. Either you provide official transport or I find my own way. But I am going back to Eagle Ridge. Marshall won't authorize it. Direct exchange with terrorists violates every protocol we have." "Then don't tell him," Emma replied, At least not until I'm already in the air. Rivera studied her through the video connection, clearly weighing professional obligations against personal loyalties. After a long moment, she nodded. There's a C-17 scheduled for Andrews in 90 minutes. I can get you on it as courier for sensitive materials related to the Alpha Reed interrogation. But Hayes, this is effectively going rogue. You understand the implications. I do, Emma confirmed, and I accept them. As she terminated the connection and left the communications center, Emma felt a strange sense of clarity descending. For months, she had been torn between her military identity and her civilian aspirations, unable to fully commit to either. Now faced with a threat to the people who had accepted her as Emma Hayes' art student, she found the division dissolving. She wasn't choosing between Sergeant Hayes and Emma Hayes anymore. She was simply doing what either version of herself would do, protecting the people she cared about, whatever the cost. The flight to Andrews Air Force Base passed in a blur of preparation and planning. Emma used the time to review everything known about the hostage situation study, the layout of the administration building where the terrorists were holding their captives, and coordinate with the FBI team already on site. By the time the C-17 touched down on American soil, she had developed a rough operational plan, one that the official response team would never approve, but that offered the best chance of saving the hostages without sacrificing herself in the process. As she deplaned, she was surprised to find Victor Thompson waiting for her on the tarmac. The Vietnam veteran was dressed in civilian clothes rather than his campus security uniform, but his military bearing was unmistakable even at a distance. "Thompson," she greeted him, genuine relief in her voice at seeing a familiar face. "How did you know I was coming in?" "I have friends who still serve," he replied cryptically. "Old networks that never quite shut down. When I heard what happened at Eagle Ridge, I figured you'd be on the first transport back." "You shouldn't be here," Emma said, though she was grateful for his presence. "The campus is under lockdown, and you're supposed to be retired from this kind of operation." And Thompson's weathered face creased in a grim smile. "Some things you never retire from, Hayes. Protecting your people is one of them. Besides, I know that campus better than any tactical team they've brought in. Every tunnel, every access point, every blind spot in the security system." Emma studied him, recognizing the determination in his eyes, the same look she'd seen in countless veterans who'd found themselves pulled back into action by circumstances beyond their control. "They'll never authorize you to participate in the operation," she pointed out. "They don't need to," Thompson replied, "because we're not going to be part of the official operation, are we?" Emma couldn't help but return his knowing smile. "No, we're not. We're going to do what needs to be done while they do what the regulations require." "Just like old times," Thompson said, though he couldn't possibly know the details of her classified operations. But he didn't need to. Some experiences transcended specific conflicts or eras, creating understanding between warriors separated by generations. "I've got transportation arranged," he continued, "and some equipment you might find useful. Nothing official, just resources from people who understand what's at stake." As they walked toward the unmarked SUV waiting at the edge of the tarmac, Emma felt a shift in her perspective, a recognition that she wasn't alone in this mission. Thompson represented something she had almost forgotten during her months at Eagle Ridge, the brotherhood of those who had served, the unspoken bond that crossed boundaries of age, rank, and specific conflicts. The drive to Montana would take them through the night, giving Emma time to refine her plan and prepare for what would certainly be the most personal operation of her career. The terrorists holding Rachel and the others had made a critical error in their calculations. They had assumed Sergeant Hayes would follow official protocols, weighing the lives of a few hostages against broader policy considerations. But they weren't dealing with Sergeant Hayes anymore. They were facing Emma Hayes, someone who had found something worth fighting for beyond abstract concepts of duty or national security. Someone who had experienced the value of genuine human connection after years of operational detachment. Someone who would stop at nothing to protect the people who had accepted her when she was at her most vulnerable. As the SUV merged onto the highway and accelerated into the gathering darkness, Emma checked her secure phone for updates. The hostage situation remained unchanged, the terrorists maintaining their position, the FBI establishing containment, while negotiators attempted to open dialogue. The 24-hour deadline would expire at 3:17 p.m. the following day. Emma and Thompson would reach Eagle Ridge with just hours to spare. "You should try to get some rest," Thompson advised from behind the wheel. "Long night ahead, and you'll need to be sharp tomorrow." Emma nodded, though she doubted sleep would come easily with her mind racing through tactical scenarios and contingency plans. Still, she reclined her seat slightly and closed her eyes, using the meditation techniques she'd been taught during special operations training to quiet her thoughts and conserve energy. As the miles passed beneath them, she found herself thinking not of the mission ahead, but of the moments that had defined her time at Eagle Ridge, studying with Rachel in their shared room, discussing art theory with Professor Miller, navigating the simple challenges of college life that had once seemed so foreign compared to the life-or-death decisions of combat operations. Those 3 months as a student had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She had discovered aspects of herself beyond the tactical skills and operational mindset that had defined her military career. Creativity, curiosity, the capacity for friendships based on shared interests rather than shared dangers. Now, those discoveries were being threatened by the very past she had tried to escape. The irony wasn't lost on her that, in fleeing from violence, she had inadvertently brought it to the peaceful world she'd been trying to build. But there was another truth emerging from this crisis, one that offered a kind of resolution to the identity conflict she'd been struggling with since leaving the military. The skills that made her a formidable operative could also be used to protect, rather than destroy. The training that had once been directed toward national security objectives could be repurposed to defend the specific people and community she had come to value. Perhaps Victor Thompson had been right at their parting at Eagle Ridge. The key wasn't separating the different aspects of herself, but integrating them into a coherent whole. Not Sergeant Hayes or Emma Hayes, but simply Emma, someone who could bring the full range of her capabilities to bear in service of what truly mattered. With that thought providing unexpected comfort, she drifted into the light, vigilant sleep of a soldier on mission, resting enough to maintain function while remaining aware of her surroundings and ready to respond to any change in conditions. Thompson maintained a steady pace through the night, his driving reflecting the same disciplined efficiency that had marked his military service decades earlier. They stopped only for fuel and brief stretches, speaking little but sharing the focused determination of those committed to a common purpose. As dawn broke over the Montana landscape, Emma's secure phone buzzed with an incoming message from Rivera. "Marshall knows. He's furious but won't interfere. HRT commander advised of your approach, unofficial cooperation authorized at his discretion. Good luck." It was as much support as she could have hoped for under the circumstances, not official authorization, but tacit acknowledgement that sometimes the rigid protocols of counterterrorism operations needed to be supplemented by more flexible approaches. 4 hours later, they reached the outskirts of the town that housed Eagle Ridge University. Even from a distance, the changed atmosphere was palpable. Police checkpoints on the main roads, media vehicles gathered at designated staging areas, the unusual quiet of a community in crisis. Thompson navigated through back roads using his knowledge of the area to avoid the main security cordons. They stopped at a small cabin several miles from campus, apparently one of the resources he had mentioned at Andrews. Inside, they found a carefully prepared staging area, communications equipment, tactical gear, and building schematics spread across a rough wooden table. Two men in civilian clothes rose as they entered their bearing, immediately identifying them as military or law enforcement, despite their casual appearance. "Hayes, this is Williams, and Cortez," Thompson introduced them. "Former Special Operations, now Private Security. They've agreed to provide unofficial assistance." Emma assessed the men with a professional eye, recognizing the calm competence of experienced operators. "Appreciation," she said, simply extending her hand to each in turn. "No thanks needed," Williams replied. "Thompson saved my father in Quezon. Family debt." "And I just don't like terrorists," Cortez added with a grim smile. "Especially ones who take college kids hostage." Together, they reviewed the latest intelligence from the campus. The situation remained largely unchanged. 10 hostages held in the president's conference room on the top floor of the administration building, surrounded by an estimated 6 to 8 heavily armed terrorists with military-grade equipment and training. FBI negotiators had established communication, but made little progress. The terrorists remained fixed on their demand, Emma Hayes, in exchange for the hostages, with no compromise acceptable. "They're not interested in actual negotiation," Emma observed, studying the patterns of communication. "This isn't about making a deal, it's about drawing me in." "Revenge," Thompson suggested. "Partly," Emma agreed. "But there's something else. They're too well-equipped, too well-trained for a simple revenge mission. This feels like a proving ground." "For what?" Williams asked. "To demonstrate that they can strike anywhere against any target," Emma explained. "Even a seemingly random university in Montana. It's about showing that distance and obscurity provide no protection." "Psychological warfare." Cortez nodded in understanding. "Make everyone feel vulnerable." "Exactly," Emma confirmed. "Which means they won't back down, won't accept alternatives. They need this to play out exactly as they've planned me surrendering the hostages released, than whatever endgame they have in mind." "Which is likely your public execution," Thompson said bluntly. "Maximum psychological impact." Emma nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. "So we give them what they expect, right up until the moment we don't." She outlined her plan, a plan that violated every standard protocol for hostage situations, but offered the best chance of success given the specific circumstances. It was high risk, dependent on precise timing and execution, with multiple potential failure points. But it was also unexpected, leveraging the terrorists' own assumptions against them. "This is going to require coordination with the official response team," Williams pointed out, "even if it's unofficial cooperation." "Already in progress," Emma confirmed, showing them Rivera's message. "I need to make contact with the HRT commander to synchronize our approach." While Cortez established a secure communication link with the FBI tactical team, Emma prepared herself both mentally and physically for what lay ahead. She checked and rechecked her equipment, ran through the building layout in her mind, and focused on controlling the emotional response that threatened to cloud her tactical judgment. Rachel and Professor Miller were more than just hostages to her, they were connections to the life she had been building, people who had accepted her without knowing her full history. Their safety had become personal in a way that few missions ever had during her military service. That personal investment was both a strength and a vulnerability. It provided motivation and clarity of purpose, but also created the potential for emotional decisions that might compromise operational effectiveness. Finding the balance would be crucial to the success of the mission. As the final preparations were completed, and the team prepared to move into position. Emma took a moment alone on the cabin's small porch. The Montana landscape spread before her, rolling hills, dense forests, the distant outline of mountains against the sky. It was a view that had become familiar during her months at Eagle Ridge, a peaceful backdrop to her attempt at building a normal life. Now that peace had been shattered, perhaps irreparably. Whatever the outcome of today's operation, Emma knew that her time as an ordinary college student had ended the moment those terrorists had targeted her friends. The question that remained was, what would take its place? A return to military service, some new identity combining elements of both worlds, or something entirely different that she had yet to imagine. Thompson joined her on the porch, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly. Emma shook her head. "No, just recognizing that there's no going back. Not completely." "There never is," Thompson agreed. "Not after something like this, but that doesn't mean there's no way forward." Emma considered his words, finding unexpected wisdom in their simplicity. The path ahead might not be the one she had originally envisioned when coming to Eagle Ridge, but perhaps it could still lead somewhere worth going. "Time to move," she said, turning back toward the cabin where Williams and Cortez were making final equipment checks. The next few hours would determine not just the fate of the hostages, but also the direction of Emma's own future. Whatever came after, she was committed to ensuring that Rachel, Professor Miller, and the others would have the chance to continue their lives, even if it meant sacrificing the life she had tried to build alongside them. As they loaded into the unmarked vehicles that would take them to their staging positions near campus, Emma felt the familiar calm of pre-mission focus settling over her. The doubts and questions about identity that had plagued her for months receded, replaced by absolute clarity of purpose. Today, she wasn't Sergeant Hayes or Emma the art student. She was simply Emma Hayes, using every skill, every capability, every aspect of herself to protect the people who mattered. And in that integration of her divided self, she found an unexpected sense of wholeness. 1 year after the hostage crisis at Eagle Ridge University, the campus showed few visible signs of the trauma it had endured. Students moved between classes with the casual confidence of youth faculty, engaged in animated discussions outside academic buildings, and the rhythm of university life continued its familiar pattern of semesters, breaks, and graduations. But subtle changes were evident to those who knew where to look. Enhanced security measures, integrated discreetly into the campus architecture, emergency response protocols posted in every building, and a new facility rising behind the humanities complex, where once there had been only an underutilized maintenance building. The sign at the construction site read, "Future home of the Hayes-Thompson Veterans Transition Center," with an anticipated completion date of spring 2024. Emma stood at the edge of the construction area watching as workers positioned steel support beams for what would become the center's main classroom building. The April sunshine was warm on her face, a pleasant contrast to the chill that had lingered well into spring. "Impressive progress," said a voice beside her. "Ahead of schedule and under budget, according to the project manager." Emma turned to find University President Richard Westfield approaching, his silver hair catching the sunlight. At 61, he carried himself with the same military bearing that had been evident during their first meeting a year earlier, though the circumstances then had been considerably more tense. "President Westfield," Emma greeted him with a smile. "I didn't expect to see you here today." "I make it a point to check on our priority projects personally," he replied, "especially those with particular significance to the university's mission." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the construction activity. The center represented a major investment for Eagle Ridge, not just financially but philosophically. It would serve as a dedicated facility for military veterans transitioning to academic life, providing specialized support services tailored academic programs, and a community of shared experience. The first cohort of veterans is already confirmed for fall semester, Westfield informed her. 12 former service members ranging from 22 to 41 years of age. Combat experience in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and several classified theaters of operation. Emma nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and apprehension at the responsibility of helping shape these veterans' transitions to civilian life. They'll be the pioneers testing our programs, helping us refine our approach. And they're all excited about learning from someone who understands firsthand the challenges they're facing, Westfield added, glancing at Emma with undisguised respect. Your dual experience gives you a unique perspective that traditional academic advisors simply can't match. Emma accepted the compliment with a slight nod, still uncomfortable with the near-legendary status she had acquired on campus following the hostage crisis. The full details of the operation remained classified, but enough information had emerged to transform Emma Hayes' freshman art student into a figure of considerable campus renown. The official narrative acknowledged only that she had assisted federal authorities in resolving the situation, using her previous military experience to help secure the safe release of all hostages. The more dramatic elements, her unauthorized return from Europe, the high-risk infiltration of the administration building, the final confrontation with the terrorist leader, remained known only to those with appropriate security clearances. What mattered to Emma was the outcome. Rachel, Professor Miller, and the other hostages had survived. The terrorist cell had been neutralized, and in the aftermath, Emma had found an unexpected path forward, neither fully military nor fully civilian, but a unique integration of both worlds. The Department of Defense delegation arrives tomorrow, Westfield reminded her as they walked along the perimeter of the construction site. They're interested in using our program as a model for similar initiatives at universities nationwide. Emma nodded, having spent considerable time preparing for this visit. I've arranged for them to meet with several of our veteran students already enrolled in regular programs to get first-hand accounts of the challenges they've faced. Good, Westfield approved. Nothing speaks more convincingly than direct testimony. He paused, studying her with thoughtful consideration. You've accomplished remarkable things in the past year, Hayes. This center, the curriculum development, the outreach to veterans organizations. It's impressive by any standard, but especially given the circumstances that preceded it. Emma appreciated his discretion in not directly referencing the hostage crisis or its aftermath, the debriefings, the investigations, the difficult decisions about her future that had followed. Westfield, with his own military background, understood better than most the complex process of reconciling service experience with civilian life. I had excellent support, she replied simply. From the university, from the veterans community, from friends who stood by me through the transition. And the memory of those first weeks after the crisis remained vivid, the media attention that had threatened to overwhelm her privacy, the academic accommodations that had allowed her to complete her freshman year, despite the disruption, and most importantly, the friends who had accepted her complete story with understanding rather than judgment. Rachel, in particular, had demonstrated a capacity for forgiveness that still humbled Emma. Their friendship had not only survived the revelations about Emma's past and the trauma of the hostage situation, but had somehow deepened through the shared experience. Speaking of friends, Westfield said, as if reading her thoughts, I understand Ms. Wilson has been accepted to the graduate journalism program at Columbia. Emma smiled at the mention of Rachel's achievement. Yes, she leaves in August. Her series on veterans' experiences in higher education caught the attention of several prestigious programs. A series that began with your story, Westfield observed. A small part of it, Emma corrected modestly. Rachel expanded it to include veterans from multiple eras and conflicts. It's become something much larger than just my experience. They reached the edge of the quad where students lounged on the grass, enjoying the spring weather. Among them, Emma spotted Victor Thompson sitting on a bench, deep in conversation with a young man whose military-style haircut and alert posture marked him as one of the veterans already enrolled at Eagle Ridge. Thompson seems to have found his calling as a mentor, Westfield noted, following Emma's gaze. He understands what they're going through better than anyone. Emma agreed. 50 years after Vietnam, and he still remembers the challenges of returning to civilian life. After the hostage crisis, Thompson had officially retired from campus security, only to return months later as a volunteer advisor to veteran students. His decades of experience both in military service and in the long transition that followed made him an invaluable resource for younger veterans struggling with similar adjustments. Your partnership with him has been instrumental to the center's development, Westfield acknowledged. The Hayes-Thompson model, as the Pentagon has taken to calling it. Emma felt a flush of pride at this recognition, though she still found it strange to hear her name attached to a formal program. Her role had evolved organically in the months following the crisis, first as a student liaison for veteran affairs, then as a consultant on the center's design, and finally as a core faculty member for the specialized curriculum being developed. The academic path she had begun as a cover had become genuine, though her focus had shifted from art to interdisciplinary studies combining psychology, organizational leadership, and creative expression as tools for post-service transition. "I should check on the preparations for tomorrow's visit," Emma said, glancing at her watch. The presentation materials needed some final adjustments. Westfield nodded, understanding. "Of course. Don't let me keep you from your responsibilities." As Emma turned to go, he added, "Hayes, what you're building here matters, not just to the veterans who will benefit directly, but to the university as a whole. You're creating a bridge between worlds that too often remain separate." The observation struck Emma as particularly apt. A bridge between worlds, military and civilian past and future service, and self-determination. It described not just the center under construction, but the personal integration she had been working toward since leaving that military hospital in Germany 18 months earlier. Emma made her way across campus toward her office in the Humanities Building, greeting students and colleagues as she passed. Her dual identity was common knowledge now, no more need for deception or compartmentalization. She was Professor Hayes to her students, Emma to her friends, and occasionally, when circumstances required, Sergeant Hayes to military and government contacts. The compartments hadn't disappeared entirely. There were still aspects of her service experience that remained classified, still memories she chose not to share. But the rigid boundaries had dissolved, allowing for a more authentic expression of her complete self. As she entered the Humanities Building, she heard a familiar voice call her name. Rachel Wilson hurried down the corridor, her expression animated with excitement. "Emma, I've been looking everywhere for you," Rachel exclaimed, falling into step beside her. "The editor at Veterans Perspectives just accepted my final piece in the series. They're publishing it next month." "That's fantastic," Emma replied with genuine enthusiasm. "The culminating article deserves that recognition." Rachel beamed with pride. "They're calling it Groundbreaking, a New Perspective on Veteran Integration that Challenges Traditional Support Models." Her expression softened. "Of course they don't realize how much of it came directly from your experiences and insights." "Your journalism brought those insights to life," Emma countered. "I just provided raw material. You created something meaningful from it." They reached Emma's office, a modest space filled with an eclectic mixture of academic texts, military history volumes, and art supplies. The walls displayed both traditional academic credentials and framed photographs of the Veterans Transition Center in various stages of construction. One photograph stood apart from the others, the image of Emma and her mother at Camp Pendleton that had once been hidden in a psychology textbook. Now it occupied a place of honor on her desk, no longer a secret to be concealed, but a foundation to be acknowledged. "Have you heard from your father?" Rachel asked, noticing Emma's gaze lingering on the photograph. Emma nodded. "He's flying in for the center's groundbreaking ceremony next month. First time he's visited since everything happened." The relationship with her father had been among the most difficult to navigate in the aftermath of the crisis. A career Navy SEAL with strong opinions about duty and service, he had struggled to understand her decision to leave the military, even as he respected her actions during the hostage situation. Their reconciliation had begun gradually, first through formal emails, then occasional phone calls, and finally a weekend visit to his home in Virginia, where they had begun the challenging process of truly seeing each other beyond the roles of soldier and superior. "He's proud of what you're building here," Rachel observed, "even if he expresses it in his own military way." Emma smiled at the accurate assessment. Her father's approval typically came in the form of tactical suggestions for the center's security protocols or critiques of the Pentagon's approach to veteran transition programs, his way of engaging with her work, while maintaining the emotional distance that came naturally to him. "He is," she agreed, "in his own way." A notification chimed on Emma's phone, a reminder of her afternoon appointment with Professor Miller to finalize their joint presentation for the Pentagon delegation. Diana Miller had become both mentor and collaborator in the past year, helping Emma navigate the complexities of academia while integrating military perspectives into traditional educational frameworks. "I should go," Rachel said, noting the time. "I've got a final interview with Thompson for the epilogue piece, his reflections on seeing multiple generations of veterans go through the transition process." As Rachel turned to leave, she paused in the doorway. "Don't forget dinner tonight, 7:00 at Mason's. The whole group is coming to celebrate the center's progress." "I'll be there," Emma promised. After Rachel departed, Emma gathered the materials for her meeting with Professor Miller, her mind already shifting to the academic considerations of their presentation. But as she prepared to leave her office, her secure phone, the one that connected her to her military past, vibrated with an incoming message. The text was from Colonel Marshall, brief and to the point. "Alpha Reed escaped custody during transport. Details secure. Call when able." Emma felt a chill of recognition run through her at the news. The man behind the attack on Eagle Ridge, the architect of the hostage crisis that had nearly cost Rachel and the others their lives, was once again at large. For a moment, she stood frozen between reactions: the tactical assessment of Sergeant Hayes, calculating threat levels and response options, and the protective concern of Professor Hayes, worried about the impact on the community she had helped build. A year earlier, such conflicting impulses might have paralyzed her, reinforcing the division between her military and civilian identities. Now she integrated them seamlessly, acknowledging the potential threat, while refusing to let it derail the life and work she had established. She would call Marshall, gather information, take appropriate precautions. But she would also meet with Professor Miller, finalize their presentation, and join her friends for dinner at Mason's. She would continue building the Veterans Transition Center and teaching her classes and mentoring students, finding their own paths between worlds. Because that integration, that ability to honor all aspects of her experience and identity, was the true victory she had achieved in the aftermath of crisis. Emma tucked the secure phone away and gathered her presentation materials. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as her complete self, not divided between Sergeant Hayes and Emma the student, but united as Emma Hayes, a woman who had learned that strength comes not from compartmentalizing different aspects of identity, but from bringing them into harmony. As she left her office and walked down the sunlit corridor of the Humanities Building, Emma felt a sense of purpose that transcended the specific roles she had played throughout her journey. The path forward might not be straight or simple, but it was authentically hers, a route mapped not by external expectations, but by the integration of all she had been and all she hoped to become. And in that integration, she had finally found what she had been seeking since leaving that military hospital in Germany, not an escape from her past, but a way to carry it forward with purpose and meaning. Not a rejection of her capabilities, but a redirection of them toward building rather than destroying. Not just a way to live with herself, but a way to live fully as herself. Emma Hayes had come home.